So Bobby's going to talk about power a little bit today, which is an intriguing concept. I tried to write a little bit about it 2 weeks ago and only realized that I understand it even less than I realized going into what I was writing. But here's my question for you. When you think about power, and I mean, there's so many different ways I think you could define that. Where does it intersect with you? Where do you see power come into play? However you would define it. I mean, really, at this stage, it's very big end of the funnel. I'm not looking for anything specific. When you think of power and how it interplays with you, or where it intersects with you, where do you see power come into play? Is that a fair question? I'll give you time to think about it. Does it even make sense?
Yeah.
Well, the policeman pulls you over. Why did you pull over?
I was like, what I have with my kids. If I say something,
Yes.
the better is.
Yeah, there you go. There's power. There's certain things you cannot do. I was thinking of somebody knows something about you that nobody else knows. Somewhat, maybe not all that flattering. It's a pretty significant position of power, right? Could be just physical strength, or maybe you've got a gift or a skill that's better than anybody else around. That's a powerful position. I feel like. Where do you intersect? Where do you see intersections of power in your own life? Was I late? Just Mike. I feel powerful because I know Pavi better than you guys. I actually do. I think knowing him, knowing Pavi and the connections he has and the people that he knows and the intelligence he has, I actually feel like I have an advantage. It's just an example from my own life.
Mike is also delusional.
There's always a flip side.
Yeah.
Come on.
What's so general? It's hard to say.
How about I start and then in the middle it'll pop up?
Guess it was a bad
Okay.
question.
So there was an Indian man who came to see me last Sunday, and he's 68. He's in a nursing home. He thinks he has maybe 6 months left. His health is really poor. He's had bypass surgery and all kinds of stuff. Devout Hindu. His life imploded a few years ago, and he's been trying to figure things out. And he is thinking maybe that Jesus might be the answer, And so he's been investigating. He's a bright guy. So he goes to like 3 different services every week. He goes to the mass, and he goes to 2 different Protestant churches. He's reading voraciously. He's got a Catholic priest coming after him every week. He's got 2 other pastors meeting with him regularly. And I didn't know all this, so I started chatting with him. And I felt like, wow, I don't know what to say because there's so much data that he's collecting. And he's reading. He just finished a 700-page book on purgatory. I know, seriously, I'm thinking if you have 6 months left, you're not reading that. It's not other stuff we should be putting ourselves to. So we would very, if you think you have 6 months left, then your mind is very focused on these things, right? So as I listened to him and I was trying to slowly understand who are these people he's meeting with, because I know some of them, and I was very aware of this power dynamic behind the conversation. I don't want to tread on this person's toes. This guy's my friend, and he said that to you, and how do I respond to that? So I was just working my way through it, and then I got really impatient because I felt that all our conversation is around these things, creation and evolution and purgatory, and why the Catholic Church and Protestant Church, what's the Reformation all about, and what do you think of the Eucharist, and what do you think of that? And I felt like all of it is not the core. There's Jesus, and we're just spending all our time on all these other things. So a lot of our conversation drifted towards Jesus, and he was startled because he said, "Should I go to the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church?" And I was like, "Whatever you want, really. You don't want to go, that's fine too by me. Okay, you might, want to beat me up. But I'm just saying that the critical thing for him, as it is for you and me, is you and Jesus. What's going on there? If you can figure that out, all that other stuff can take its place. I could watch his face almost settle into relief. I mean, it was visceral, physical relief. That I don't have to figure all that out. I don't need to know purgatory inside out. You really don't. You don't have to do. You need to know this Jesus, and what do you think about him? That was like a real relief. And then he suddenly slid into, of course, I want to follow him. I mean, I'm trying to follow him. I love the Lord's Prayer. And then he starts quoting bits of scripture, and then he starts telling me about his prayer life and utter repentance and contrition and simplicity. I'm listening and thinking, you're already following him. I'm not sure why we're having this conversation. So my drift shifted to, no, you're great. You're just carrying on just the way you are. Pitch all those books out the window. Have you read the Gospels? No. I'm like, okay, here's Mark. He started Mark. Here's the Bible. He has this thick King James version someone gave him. And sure, he's not reading it. It's just there. So for me, that was like a shocking experience. So ironic. Here's this man that Jesus has wooed his heart, and he's following him. He doesn't know it, and he thinks he has to know all this other stuff. So we got past that hurdle, and then the next hurdle was, and he looks around, a little sheepish, and he says, "Do I have to eat meat?" I was like, "No, you don't." So I've been a vegetarian all my life, and the thought of eating meat is just, I can't do it. And I was like, "You don't. It's totally fine. Eat whatever you want, And he goes, "But if God gave us this good gift of meat, will he be offended if I don't eat it?" I'm like, "No, he's chill. He can handle that." So, and then we got to the third issue, which is his daughter. His family's all broken up. He's got twin daughters, only one of whom he's still in touch with, and he loves her. She went to church years ago, and things went really bad. She got hurt, she got angry, she got cynical, and so she's telling him, you can't do anything. You don't do anything with the church till I come, and I need to talk to whichever pastor or whoever. I got to grill them. And I respect that. He felt like I need to hold on to this. Now, so we were talking about what does it mean, but he had switched in those couple hours from all this other stuff to Jesus. I'll see him again tomorrow, and I guarantee that he switched back to this. There's something compelling about this stuff. You feel like you need to know all these things, or you need to have you act right in all these things. Anyway, I think that'll be But it made me think about this issue of power, because, I'll come to in a little bit. If you look at the broad stroke, and I'm going to do two things today. I want to look at a specific example of how power play happened in the church, and then I want to go back to Jesus and look at him a little bit. But if you look at the church, broad stroke, 2,000 years, you could break it down into, for the first 1,000 years roughly, there was one church, sort of. And then the church split into the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, the Great Schism in 1054, somewhere thereabouts. And then you could go from there to the Reformation, which you can date. Martin Luther nailed those 95 theses like 1517. So then the church split again. So you could say in broad strokes you got the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church and the Protestant Church. It's really not like that, though. There are so many divisions within it. It's amazing. The Protestant Church alone has 40,000 denominations. 40,000 ways that people decided, I can't be in fellowship with you because we differ on something. There are not 40,000 verses in the Bible. So, it's like, what are you talking about, right? So power, the acquisition and use of power, is integral to the story of the church. And so I want to dive into this particular episode, see what you think about it, and then take a step back. So I want to look at the Council of Chalcedon. This is 451 AD. It's a council. This is still at the time that the church was still one, and the issue that on the table that they were trying to figure out is the issue of Jesus being God and man. How does that thing work out, right? And the debate was incredibly there were about 520 bishops who came to this. These were the leaders of the churches across there were churches around part of this, but for the most church leaders were there. And the debate was complex, very philosophical, very involved. If Jesus had these two there's a divine something and a human something, and how do they come together? Are they separate? Are they fused together? Do they weave in and out? And sophisticated philosophical debates. And it split up into two categories of thinking. One is Jesus is fully integrated. His human and divine aspects are fused together, and they're one. And the problem there became, if that's true, then in his humanity he changes, so can God change? And that was a big philosophical debate, can God change or not? That's on the one side. On the other side were those who were saying he is fully divine and he's fully human, and they both exist in this person. Exactly how, who knows? And I guarantee you, if you go back and read the stuff, you'll fall asleep really fast. Honestly, the best among us go like, what are they talking about? And there's so arcane, specific bits of language, specific concepts of Greek philosophy that are debated. It's so far removed sometimes from, anyway. So but by this time in the church, power had become centralized in 4 cities. There was Alexandria in North Africa. You can imagine North Africa. And then just up the coast from Jerusalem is Antioch in present day in Syria. So there's Alexandria in Africa, North Africa, and then there's Antioch in Syria. And then there's Rome. Rome is not as strong then as it is today. It's just a center of power. And then Constantinople, Istanbul, Constantinople. That has become the seat of the Roman emperor by this time. So those are the 4 places that there was power. And because Constantinople, Istanbul, was the seat of the Roman emperor at that time, Roman emperor, it's kind of funny to say that, right? The Holy Roman Empire was in Istanbul. So the bishop of Istanbul had great power, just because the bishop was right there. The king was right there. So Alexandria, North Africa, was talking integration. This human divine is fused, integrated, connected. Alexandria was saying that. Antioch was saying no. And so there was this tension going on. And there was another issue that had to be resolved at that time, was the question of Mary, Jesus' mother. So by this time, Mary was taking up a very significant role in the church. These theologians then were contrasting the unfaithfulness of Eve back in the Garden of Eden with the faithfulness of Mary. So that was sort of the thing. And then the idea of Mary being a virgin forever seemed to take on power. Sex was seen as unclean and wrong and weird because church leaders were all celibate, supposedly, right, at that time. So it didn't seem right for the Mother of God to be having sex. That just didn't compute. So the idea that she was a virgin all the way through her life became more dominant.
Didn't Jesus have siblings?
Yeah, that's right.
Were they all virgin births?
No, the Catholic tradition on that is that it was Joseph's previous wife. So Joseph was older when he married Mary and had children by a previous, and then he dies off early. He's not to be found. So that's the
typical man.
Typical man. Yeah.
Always absent. The other thing is there's a quibble about the words. Some people want to say that the Aramaic word can mean cousin. Instead of actual brother.
Yeah, that's true. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yep. So there are ways of explaining it away, but that was going on. And the bigger issue was Mary the mother of God? That debate is going on to this day. She gave birth to Jesus, so is she the mother of God? And is that like a special something? And did she contribute to the salvation of all humanity because she's the mother of God? Now, many of the new converts to Christianity came from pagan religions, which had goddesses, right? So there was an inclination to want equal representation, and Mary fit the bill. It's nice to have a woman who had this real position in the story of salvation. So that was going on as well. So the Bishop of Constantinople, Nestorius, publicly said Mary is not the mother of God. Mother of Jesus, but not the mother of God. When he said that publicly, big debate happened, and Alexandria, North Africa said, no, you're wrong, she is the mother of God. So of course Antioch took the opposite perspective, yes she is, and they all appealed to Rome. See the dynamics here. Constantinople says something, Alexandria agrees, Antioch disagrees, so you got to find the next guy. And if you find a guy who will settle the debate, he has power. This is the first time we see Rome on the upswing in terms of the power dynamic.
Can I ask you a tangential question?
Yes.
What did that debate look like? How did that actually happen? How did a guy say something in Constantinople that got heard in Alexandria?
Yeah, traveling teachers, written documents. At this time, Leo, who was the Pope in Rome, great scholar, had written something called Leo's Tome. For real. That's what they call it, Leo's Tome. And there was a guy before him, Cyril, who had some writings that define orthodoxy. So all the debate was around who's right.
And who would see those documents?
Church leaders.
Dozens of people?
Yeah.
Hundreds of people?
Hundreds of people. Not more than that. Literacy wasn't that common. So,
That's one of the things I find.
It's very small.
Well, the literacy is very good in a tiny crust.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then, right, so these people
That's right.
up here are extremely literate, writing
Yeah.
to each other all the time,
Right.
publishing.
Right.
It was a part of Roman culture before the church ever existed. So documentation, and we have these things.
We have these things, yeah.
They survive.
It's just the difference between then and now in terms of debate. The numbers of people that are
Yeah.
involved. How you
Now everybody's in
would
it.
ever
Right.
have any kind of gathering and agreement
Today?
today
Impossible.
on anything.
Impossible.
Don't go.
Yeah, not even worth trying. You could have a moment's
Well, they
agreement
didn't
on
agree
Twitter or
then.
something.
They gathered, but they didn't agree.
And today you'd have to have these debates on Twitter, which limits you, significantly. So the Roman bishop at this time, and so they had a council in Chalcedon in 451, and the Roman bishop Leo was outstanding scholar leader, often called Leo the Great, and he was arguing for a certain perspective, which it turned out his perspective became the official church perspective, and all the dust settled. He was also arguing at the same time that he was the official representative of Peter on the earth. So he was arguing for power, that Rome should be deferred to by everybody. Yes?
I have a question. I'm very interested in Catholicism right now.
Yeah.
And I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So is that one of the first times in history that comes up?
Yeah.
See, that's important because if you, and I'm not anti-Catholic at all,
Yeah.
if you read a lot of them, they don't say that. They just gloss over that part. They say, oh, well, we've got apostolic succession all the way from Peter, blah, blah, blah. They don't mention that it wasn't around for, how many hundred years?
Yeah, but it's so perspectival, though. If you have a Catholic scholar sitting here, you'd say, yeah, hang on, what about this and this and this and this? It's a matter of weighing relatively these dynamics. History is not as simple as we'd like it to be.
That's very true.
I wish it was, but it's not.
An accurate view of history is an untidy view of history.
It's very untidy, yeah.
It's not, everything I believe is perfect and here's history. That's not true.
Right.
It doesn't happen anyway.
Yeah, usually what I find myself doing is I assemble all the data that I want to present and push the rest away and say, here's what happened,
That's
So
what historians do.
that's what we do, that's
They're
right.
always sorting, you have to sort.
That's what I do with my own life.
Well, there you go. So
Wonder why my cable got shut off. I can't figure it out.
So here's another dynamic in this. So the emperor is a fellow called Theodosius, and right before the council is called, he gets thrown off his horse and gets killed. And his wife is, not his wife, his sister is a good friend of Leo. Okay, and his sister then takes over power, and her husband Marcian becomes emperor of Rome. So now Leo's got a real in. So power is in Constantinople, but Leo's got a real in with the emperor. So then when all the debate was done, Leo's perspective was accepted. There were a couple of nods to the opposing perspective, but Leo's perspective was held to be orthodox. There are still churches, the Copts in Egypt to this day, who believe it a little different than how the church decided. There was another difference between the eastern is Istanbul, western is Rome parts of the church. The western part of the church believed that once the council decided, things were written down, it was done. This is it. The eastern side of the church saw that as a starting point for further discussion. So clearly they went off in all kinds of different ways. Rome went dogma, the Eastern Church went, let's talk about it. So, and the council decided a bunch of other stuff like eloping was not allowed anymore. Okay, bishops were not allowed to be in business. And that's a nod to handling power, right? If you have power here, you shouldn't have power over there. That's the first time that you hear of clergy being not allowed to serve in the military. That's the first time in the church that idea starts coming in. If you're a pastor, you can't be in the military. And then that's the first time monks and nuns are forbidden to marry. The clergy were not allowed to marry, but now monks and nuns are also totally not allowed to marry. The power of bishops got elevated big time. Bishops became really powerful after this council. So there were all these things going on. And the one interesting thing that came out of it for Leo was that the Bishop of Constantinople somehow found a way to have it written down that he is at least as important as the Bishop of Rome. Okay? That really irked Leo because he had worked the whole game to get primacy. And now there were two. Antioch, Alexandria didn't count much anymore. And that tension between these two places kept building and building and building. Finally, they started excommunicating each other, and then the church is split. What do you think about all this?
Doesn't sound very noble. Sounds more like Game of Thrones than. I'm being honest. No, I'm in power. No, you're in power. I'm going to kill you. No, you're gone. I'm better than you.
Right.
It's not really excluding the gospel message.
Yeah. That's exactly right. That's the trouble, I think. I think that the history of our belief, our faith, is tightly intertwined with the use of power, acquisition, use of power. And sometimes you can make a case that the people who won were not the people who ought to have won. You know, you could go back. Yeah, somehow in the middle of this tangle, you've got to think God rules, over the flood. He's working this out. He's in charge. He's going to keep it all. He's got it figured out somehow. We don't. But at ground level, sometimes it's awfully, awfully messy.
And it takes place in a political, social, economic context, which in 451 is the obvious destruction of the western part of the empire. Leo is in Rome. Rome is essentially abandoned.
Yeah,
Its
that's right.
population has gone from more than 1 million to 250,000, and 100 years after this, it'll be 10,000 people. It's being ruined. The whole place is desolate. So,
Who's ruining it?
Germans,
Eventually the Goths,
the Goths, the Visigoths, the Vandals, etc.
Barbarians coming through.
Barbarians, the Germanic tribes, Lombards,
Yep.
no Dutch.
No Dutch. No Dutch.
So all of this theological
Yeah.
ferment is happening in the context of the end of the Roman Empire, which nobody thought it would ever end.
Ever happened? Yeah. It's astonishing. So you have to wrestle with this. I think if you're going to be at all involved in the task of being shepherds to the people of God, which is, I think, why you're here. There's something in you that God has put in you that makes you think, I want to care for the people of God. Well, you have to think very carefully and intelligently and honestly about the acquisition and use of power. Because the world around us does it really well. And it's the air you breathe. And we're going to switch into looking at Jesus for a while. And I think you're going to find that he does bizarre things with power. And I think that most of us kind of genuflect, bow to Jesus' use of power, and then go about using power the way the world does. And so I want to think about that with you a little bit.
Okay, simpler question. Do you see power struggles in the church, in your own church at Vista?
There it is, right there.
Right there's power right there. Right there. If I
That was
say
the perfect,
it's the perfect answer.
answer.
Did you hear what she said?
No, they
She
shouldn't
said,
be here.
if I say yes, will I get kicked out? There's a concern of power right there. It's like if I, right? So it officially exists.
Will I lose my job?
You can't not have it. You
Well,
cannot
whether we
not
don't.
have
I
it.
can't speak for Dublin.
Yeah, you can't. You said you can't not have it.
Yeah.
Yet I tend to pretend that it doesn't exist.
Mm.
That's the problem I have. Is I tend to pretend that there are no power struggles. That nobody's really jockeying for position.
I will say I've
But it's not true.
seen the least amount of obvious power struggles. And to state that hopefully better, just that I think naturally as humans we catch ourselves struggling in it, but at Vista it's been refreshing to see that if it does happen, it's kind of subconsciously being done. It's not, no, I actually just want to go out and acquire a bunch of power in the church and have it over all of these people. Because I think it's difficult to have power at Vista just because of the makeup, the sites, the kind of thin but broad layer of leadership we have.
Exactly.
It's harder to
Mm-hmm.
push that on a group of people.
It is.
Squirrely nature of the people.
Right, and yes, and if I can say, one of the things that attracted Betty and I to Vista so many years ago was Mike and Tammy's leadership style, where Mike's not standing up there saying, "Thus saith me," everyone doesn't do what I say. Mike's, as Gary told me when I first met with Gary years and years ago, like Mike gives most of that away. Someone that's sick in the church, Mike will go, but it's usually the life group that goes. You know, the pastoring, a lot of that is done. Not that Mike's.
Beautiful.
I'm not saying Mike doesn't do anything. That's not my point. But I'm saying he's not up
Well,
there saying.
that's another conversation. You know?
No, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's
Yeah.
a community. It is a
Yeah.
true community. It's not about one person. And a couple weeks ago, he said on Sunday morning, as we get bigger, my role becomes less. And I was like, that's a beautiful thing to me. Now, there's still power struggles, but it's not as bad as it could be or has been with other places that I've been.
It's interesting though that not everyone likes that.
Yeah.
I've
Oh, I know that.
I've heard complaints of, well, this person was sick and Mike didn't go visit them. Well, Paul Vorst did, or whomever, Tim Eisel went. I mean, why does it have to be Mike? Well, that's the pastor's job.
Is it?
So I was like, oh, this is back to the whole pastor thing. This didn't happen recently or anything.
Oh yeah, I did.
Well, not. I didn't hear about it recently. It was a while back.
It's every week.
It's everywhere.
I think power
Here's-
I'm sorry. It's a very subtle thing.
Yeah.
And it's very kind of a very undercurrent
It
type
is.
of thing. And I would agree with what Jenna said. I mean, over the years of being involved in many churches, I don't think it's as obvious in Vista. I think
Right.
it is there.
Right.
And maybe that's even, if it's more obvious, you can kind of identify it.
Yeah.
But, and it's almost like the more subtle it is, the more damage that it can do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's the main reason we don't multiply. When we have a responsibility or a job, the reason we don't give it away is because having that gives you a certain degree of power, it gives you a certain degree of significance, it gives you a certain degree of substance. It's just very insidious that we have our thing that we do, and people know that I have that thing.
Well, and there's something that comes from being led by someone who says, I have power over you.
Yeah.
Like we talking to Elizabeth the other day about whether she wanted to start dating or not, and she was like, I don't know if I'm ready to do that mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And I said, well, do you want us to say that you're not allowed to date? And she was like, yes, please, tell me, so to be able to point to somebody else and say,
Make a rule.
right, make a rule, then I have power, I have the power to give power away and then not have to be responsible for it.
So let me ask you a pointed diagnostic question, okay? Would you prefer to be powerful or powerless?
Powerful.
Yeah, I would say powerful.
Nobody's going to say powerless, honestly. If someone said powerless, either they're super spiritual or something, or there's an issue. This is our condition. We want to feel powerful. It feels horrible when we feel powerless. Because we have a hunger to feel powerful, there's no way to avoid this issue. It'll surface in all kinds of bizarre ways. John Ortberg, in that Soul book, he talks about how he was on staff at this other church, and there was this other guy, he was the preacher. And there was another guy who was a worship leader who'd get out and in his worship leading communicate a few things. And everybody loved that guy. And when he spoke, man, everybody's there. And Ortberg writes that he had this peculiar thing going on in him, that he was envious that other guy could preach self-denial better than he could.
Yeah.
You get that? That's kind of how our hearts are.
Yeah, I was just thinking, is there power in true humility? Or not true humility,
Yeah.
but in humility.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I went back to this,
Yeah.
and, so pardon where my mind went, but I was thinking about the monks, who take those pledges to
Yeah.
live, but yet they are held in very high esteem.
So it can be a devious way to acquire power, right? Can be.
Yeah.
And they did, and it was horrible.
Yeah.
You can have power by association.
Yeah.
I remember when I think I was 19 and stupid. I was just 48 and stupid.
Welcome to humanity.
So I was missionary in Hong Kong. Lady's name who ran it was Jackie Pullinger, pretty famous in England, Christian circles. Well, I went back and I could go to any place, any church, and say I work for Jackie Pullinger. People would listen to me. And well, I won't tell you what happened, but I've confessed that sin.
Yeah.
Just power of association.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that.
There's visual power and social power, right? How you dress, what you look like. These are sources of power, and they vary across the world. We don't want to admit it, but we're all very, very susceptible to that kind of thing. You don't look a certain way, you're not going to exercise power.
What I think is interesting is how you give more power to almost people that from the outside coming in sometimes. Like, let's say, like in a church, you're more likely to take someone's advice who's an expert from the outside than someone who's high up in your own church.
Why is that?
I don't know.
It's true. But you know what? I'll tell you the answer. Because that guy's going to go away. But if you give someone in the church that voice, now they have power. And you're not willing to do that. Why would you give them power? That's why the outside expert is so useful. Bring him in, say the stuff that needs to be said, kick him out. We can move on.
What's left behind is a power struggle between the people who say he's right and the people who say he's wrong.
Well, and what's what oftentimes happens is a consultant gets hired.
And now we have a real problem.
The consultant comes in, he consolidates all this power, and then they'll keep him, they'll retain him, and it's like, oh my gosh.
Okay, so let me go to Jesus a little bit, and I'm going to take a bit of a circuitous route to get there. So bear with me, and we'll get to it. I want to talk through Mark. Mark is a very intense, beautiful, sophisticated gospel that pretends to be plain. There's a lot going on in there, but it looks as if he just thrown a few stories together. And, tradition is that Mark is reflecting Peter's experience. I tend to believe that. I can see Peter's heart and questions all the way through. And the core question in Mark is, who are you? Jesus, who are you? And the way Mark answers it, the way he paints the picture, there are two threads weaving in and out with each other through the whole story. On the one hand, you find Jesus, who is this construction worker from Galilee. Yeah, that's what he is. Carpenter sounds nice. He's a construction worker. 30 years. of not much repute, of not much anything. And this construction worker is saying and doing things that sound like he thinks he's the God of Israel. That's the one thread. And on the other side, he keeps repeatedly trying to keep those who recognize that from saying anything about it. Follow the two threads? On the one hand, it's unavoidable to look at him and go, whoa, who are you? And on the other hand, he says, shut up, don't say anything. So those are the two threads I want to look at a little bit. I want to make a couple of comments on Jesus, God and man. We touched on that with Kelsey. In my mind, it's not complicated. It's like this. So God creates us in His image, right? So that at the right time, He can take on our image to most fully communicate Himself. Does that make sense? It's like a guy writing a script for a play or a movie or something, and in the play, in the movie, he writes a role that is completely himself. He writes himself into the script. So the role's out there, the play is out there. And then the right time he shows up and takes on that role. And it fits perfectly because guess what? Does that make sense? That's the way God is working this stuff out. I don't think there's any primary tension between Jesus as God and man. It isn't, simply because we are made in His image. Now there are many secondary tensions. There are many, many secondary tensions that we have to think about and explore. We don't have to get complicated about it, but fundamentally, God can fully take on a human, become a human like us, because He made us in His image. That's the thing you want to hold on to. So in Mark,
Might take me a few minutes.
okay, so I stop.
If you think it's important for us to understand that.
Okay, yeah,
Can I say something? So
Yeah.
we were talking about Pannenberg, who's a Lutheran
Yeah,
German scholar that I got
Yeah.
into, and I was talking to him about it. His entire life's work is a book called Jesus, God, and Man. And the first 3 chapters are him saying who Jesus Christ is Christianity. That's what it is. It's nothing else.
Yeah.
You can't say, well, I believe in Jesus because He died, rose from the dead. That's irrelevant unless He's God. And he goes into these deep theological, philosophical, here's what Luther believed, here's what this German guy that I've never heard of believed, here's what this guy believed, and that is what it is. That is Christianity in a question. Who is Jesus Christ?
yeah,
And Buddhism can't say that.
yeah.
Islam
Cannot.
can say, hey, Allah revealed Himself to this guy, Muhammad, but He could have done it to his cousin or the next guy down the road. Doesn't matter. He's irrelevant. Same with Buddha, same with everything, but not with Christianity.
With us,
Who
Jesus,
He is literally the most important thing.
Yeah.
Could you maybe, and I'm sorry, I may be the only one who wasn't following that, but just kind of dissect that a little bit more for us, especially like, you were talking about the 2 threads that Mark is can you, dissect that a little
The
bit?
2
more?
threads, I'm going to go into at length actually. I'm going to spend a lot of our time on those 2 threads.
Okay.
So I'll do
Okay.
that.
Did everybody get what? Can you restate what the 2 were?
Yeah, the 2 threads are, on the one hand, Jesus is speaking and acting in ways that make no sense unless He is Yahweh, unless He is the God of the Old Testament. Make no sense at all. And on the other hand, anytime anyone recognizes that, He tells them to shut up, don't say anything, don't tell anyone about it. So there's a peculiar thing there, and I want to look at that. I'm actually going to go through a lot of scripture with you so you feel what that's like. One other thing I want to say is that in the Old Testament, consistently there are things, phrases, and actions that are set apart as something that that it doesn't make sense for anybody but God to do. Okay, there are places that no one can walk into justifiably except God. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Like, God sends Moses to liberate Israel from Egypt, right? And Moses asks God, so if they ask me who sent me, what am I going to say? And, he says, I am who I am, that thing, I am. Ehyeh, which probably becomes Yahweh, this. But His name is I am. I am. So now, anytime someone says I am in that sense, it goes right back to that story. And then Jesus says it. It shocks the heck out of people, like, what are you doing? So it's places like that. This little phrase I am becomes this deep and powerful revelation of God that nobody else can say with any reason than God Himself. Okay, so that's an example like that. But just keep that in mind when we start.
But was that something where they would
Make the connection.
Well, did people just not say that?
Yeah,
Was that like a taboo to say, or was it?
it's blasphemy. It was something you get killed for because you are speaking as if you are God. You know, I mean, they were careful not to speak His name out loud because they were. It's holy. You don't approach holy things with, rashness. So when Jesus says, "I am," and He says that in some peculiar situations, and I'll look at one of them later.
But doesn't that go back to kind of like the 3 L's? The people said like Lord, liar, lunatic. Like maybe he was
C.S.
just a
Lewis.
liar, maybe he was actually crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that.
Yeah, that's Lewis's distinctions. Back in the New Testament, the only 2 options. One is you are God, or 2, you're a blasphemer that we need to kill. Those are the only 2 options. Liar didn't count. Who cares if you're a liar or lunatic? We're going to kill you, that's all. Nobody speaks like that. And the way the Gospels introduce the idea that Jesus is God is also different than how we have learned to do it. We have this, it's a philosophical approach that describes God in some fashion. We have a description of God. And then we look at Jesus and see, does He fit that? Does that sound familiar to you? What are the divine attributes of Jesus? That kind of language. So you think you know who God is, and then you start to figure out if Jesus matches that. But in fact, the New Testament inverts the question completely. Actually, it says, the question is not, is Jesus God? The question is more, or the answer is more, God is like Jesus. Do you hear that? What is God like? The only right answer for us is God is like Jesus. You don't say God is holy, God is infinite, God is transcendent, God is immanent. These are very useful, nice attributes. But the New Testament answer to the question, John 1:18 in particular, it says, God is like Jesus.
Is this a difference between Jewish thinking and, I don't know, Greek? Or
Yeah. Yeah.
We're stuck with all this Greek.
Plato, we're into Plato there.
Yeah.
Ideals and all that. So.
And Chelsea.
Yeah. So we have even today in apologetics, people do that kind of stuff. They want to prove that Jesus is God. Have you ever heard that phrase, prove that He is God? Well, no, the bigger question is to prove that God is Jesus. So if somebody comes to you and says, I have this God, Allah, or any Hindu god, Vishnu, Brahma, Shiva, the question more is he like Jesus? Because if he's not, then he's false. That's the real issue. Complete inversion. You've got to keep that in your head when you think about this whole issue. So we start, like you said, with Jesus. He's that fixed point. Everything else gets defined around Him. So remember this phrase, God is like Jesus. If you keep that in your heart, you'll be pretty safe in many places. Okay, so I talked to you about how there are bits in the Old Testament that only God can do, right? And so then when Jesus comes and says and does those things, it's very controversial. But then there are things that people expected would happen if God showed up. Okay? And most of these things that had to do with power. There was a sense that when God shows up, and He will one day show up, when He shows up, there will be power like you've never seen. There will be power at, just spectacular power at a military level, at a social political level. There will be power at a financial level. When God shows up, He will have everything that we ascribe to power, but much more of it. When He shows up, everybody will know that He has come. Is that fair? That's the sense that they had. And then Jesus comes and doesn't do that. So that's the tension in the story. So let's start.
And we will be powerful.
Yeah, and we will be powerful. That's exactly right. That's what I think Judas bought into.
We will be powerful.
Yeah, all the disciples did really. So I'll give you some examples. I'm going to read scripture to you. Is that okay? So this is Mark chapter 2. You can write these references down.
Am I getting into the story when I say that? And that's the unfortunate, poorest starting place for me as a Christian.
Yep.
Is to come to Jesus in order to be powerful.
Yeah. I would
which
tell
is
you-
why
Yeah.
it's almost a setup for that
Yeah.
because we're rejected, and so many people that are rejected or oppressed. It's like that's who Jesus comes to, and what they have lacked their whole life is the power to escape any of that,
Yeah.
to escape their own chains or escape their own poverty. And
Yeah.
there's this false thing that the church gets
Totally.
started on, and they say, if you come here, you'll have power. We'll give you
Right.
titles, we'll give you responsibilities, and Jesus will make you
Yeah.
strong. And
That is the reason I got into ministry. Honestly. Absolutely. What Mike just described, that's what I saw, and that's what I wanted. And so I was pursuing being a pastor simply because it seemed to me, in my head, in my 20s, this is what was going on. Clearly God is it, and He has a mission, He has a people through whom He's going to accomplish that mission, and these people have leaders. I got to be one of those leaders. In fact, if I could work my way to the top, that'd be pretty awesome. If I could be one of the top guys, then I would have made it. And it was very attractive to me. And God has had to break my heart over and over and over again to this day to help me see, you can get into it for all the wrong reasons, but in His mercy, He starts working with you and changing it. So, but here's our first, and I'm going to do the two threads here, the two lines. The one line we see Jesus doing things that only God can do, and then I'll come back to the other thread in just a bit. Okay, so here's the first one, Mark chapter 2. A few days later, when Jesus again entered Capernaum, the people heard that He had come home. They gathered in such large numbers that there was no room left, not even outside the door, and He preached the word to them. Some men came bringing to Him a paralyzed man carried by 4 of them. Since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus by digging through it, and then lowered the mat the man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, He said to the paralyzed man, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some teachers of the law were sitting there thinking to themselves, "Why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" That's exactly right. The deaf, Isaiah 43:25 says, even I, am He who blots out your transgressions for my own sake. Nobody else can do that. Here's a very interesting thing. Can you think of any example in the Old Testament where a person forgave another?
one person forgives another. No, I can't think.
Is that something?
I can think of.
There are two examples where
Think of
someone
forgiveness.
asks for forgiveness. One is Jacob asks Joseph to forgive his brothers. That's one. But now Joseph acts in a way that seems to indicate forgiveness. He never says anything. The second is David. Abigail asks David to forgive her husband Nabal. And he doesn't forgive him because the guy dies and all that. That's it.
Wow.
And then in the New Testament, that's pervasive, right? We are to forgive each other. It's so core to our faith. But in the Old Testament, forgiveness is a God thing, fundamentally a God thing. And in the New Testament, the fact that forgiveness is an us thing is because God has come to dwell in us. We are a God people now. So that's the... Anyway, but the teachers of the law are shocked. What do you mean you can forgive? You can do that. And you know the rest. Jesus, he heals the man and moves on, but that's one. Here's another one. Here's a second story. Mark chapter 4, verse 35 to 41. That day when evening came, He said to His disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, He took Him along just as He was in the boat. There were also other boats with Him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, which is the back, right? In the back, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke Him and said to Him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to the disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Don't you trust me?" It's actually, it says in the NIV, "Do you still have no faith?" I much prefer to say, "Don't you trust me?" That's really the heart of what's going on. Faith is like an abstract thing out there. This is personal. They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Now, if you know the Psalm 107, I'll read that to you. The context for this is some went out to the sea in ships. They were merchants on the mighty waters. They saw the works of the Lord, his wonderful deeds in the deep. For he spoke and stirred up a tempest that lifted high the waves. They mounted up to the heavens and went down to the depths. In the peril their courage melted away. They reeled and staggered like drunkards. They were at their wits' end. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. He stilled the storm to a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed. It is God and God alone who stirs up the storm and then calms it. When you see Jesus speaking to the waves, he is speaking to the waves. It's not a figure of speech. He's saying, "Be still," and they are still. It is only God who does that, and Jesus is doing it. There's a third story. I'll speak quickly to you of it. Mark chapter 6. The disciples, they go off and do all these things. They come back, they're tired, and Jesus says to them, "Come away by yourself, let's rest." He's being a shepherd to them, right? But then all these people show up, you don't know that, and then Jesus says, "Well, let's go take care of them." And he sits and he says they were like sheep without a shepherd. And so he teaches them, he feeds them. He even has them sit down on the green grass. Where do you hear of people sitting down on green grass?
Psalm 23.
Psalm 23. And if you go back to Ezekiel 34, you'll see the contrast there. God saying to the leaders of Israel, "You guys are useless shepherds. I want to be done with you. But I will be the shepherd of my people." And so there too, you see this thing going on. Finally, just one more story on this. Mark chapter 6. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida. This is verse 45. While he dismissed the crowd, after leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. Later that night, the boat was in the middle of the lake and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. Shortly before dawn, he went out to them walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage, I am. Don't be afraid." Then he climbed into the boat with them and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. The story has many levels to it, but at the first level, the background is Job chapter 9. And it's speaking. Job is speaking of God. His wisdom is profound, his power is vast, he moves mountains, etc., etc. Then he says, God alone stretches out the heavens and walks upon the sea as on dry ground. And then Jesus comes in that same way. And then in verse 11 of Job 9, he says, "When he passes by me, I do not see him. He moves on, I do not perceive him." And even that bit of him passing by the boat, it's evoking this context that he is here and he's passing by me and I don't see him. I see him, but I don't really see him. There's that tension between this man, this construction worker, and this God of the universe that they are experiencing. And of course he says, "I am." He says, "It is I am, it is I am." So there's that. And then of course there's overtones of, if you remember the story of Moses saying to God, "Show me your glory," and God sticks him in the crack of the rock and passes by. So all those are evocative of this person doing something that fundamentally is a God thing. So this all this stuff that he keeps doing evokes two very strong reactions. The religious leaders are scandalized, horrified, angry. Who is this madman who's acting like God? It's unimaginable. And he's not just saying it, he's doing things that are spectacular. So you can't really deny his power. And all the people are following him. Now they have a choice. Either you accept that this is indeed God, which is a mind-blowing thought. For us, we're familiar with it. But back then, if you think about it, this construction worker shows up and he's supposed to be Yahweh in the presence among his people. Who can swallow that? Especially if your whole livelihood and significance and power are dependent on a different construct. That's what's going on here. If they believe what he's saying, everything they've built, the whole power base they have is destroyed. The significance is destroyed. Everything's over. Now they're the same as these tax collectors and uneducated fishermen and these prostitutes that hang out with Jesus. That is psychologically untenable. So what must be done?
They're going to kill him.
Got to kill him. It's logical. You just got to get rid of him.
So the question is, what are they worshiping? They're not following the scripture. They're following their power construct. This is where God is.
They're worshiping a God who gives them what they want.
Exactly.
Yep.
So when you can't be God.
You can't be God.
That's not a concept. Though, even because I got to lose all this stuff.
That's right. That's right. I suspect that if I was back then, I'd be one of those people, honestly. Because I'm pretty good at climbing that ladder, man. I'm pretty good at that. I'd be there thinking, whoa. And I'd come up with sophisticated theology. I'll use all the right words and use all, and that's what they're doing. There's another reaction, is the disciples. They are scared out of their wits. Because they're seeing it too, and they realize, we love this guy, and we signed on to follow him, and now he's doing these crazy things. And what do I think about that? I don't know what I think about that. Do you think he's God? And they can't even say that to each other. There's this little oh my gosh, what is going on? And then they know what's coming. Because if he keeps acting like that, they're going to kill him. And now associating with him is now a death sentence. So all that is going on. And Mark captures that tension vividly. As you read it, you should sit down and read the whole book in a shot. It takes about 15 minutes. Just read through it, and it hits you. Anyway.
So the disciples, they are the rabbis who never made it, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
They're uninterested, yeah.
They didn't get the nod.
No.
They've been training just like every other Jewish boy.
Yeah.
And you wait for the rabbi to call you, and they never got called, so they're fishermen. They're not going to be the power, right? People in town, and Jesus comes along, a rabbi says, follow me, and now they have their path to power.
Right.
But, I'm tracking you.
Well, that's good, okay.
But they suspect it will just be a little power thing over here in the corner, just like everybody else has.
Yeah.
We'll have our place, just like I go to this church or that church, and I have my standing, and people know my church, and they know my people, and they know our ministry, and so we have our little power thing. But then Jesus cranks it clear up here, and now this little band of guys are in power fight with the most powerful going.
Right.
That we didn't want to get there. We want to be kind of powerful, but we don't want to make people so mad that we're so powerful we're going to have to die.
Yeah.
But
That's one strain of the tension.
about who's going to be at the right.
Yeah, of course.
We're going to get there. Don't get too far.
Just
Slow down. We get there. Yeah. Okay. So that's one strain of the story. Okay. As you read it, you get this overwhelming sense that this construction worker is saying and acting and doing things only Yahweh can do. You got to deal with that. The second strain of the story is very peculiar. I'll read it out. And so Mark 1, I'm going back to the start and I'll work my way back. Mark 1:32, that evening, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak, because they knew who he was. Does that sound a little weird to you? Here's another one.
Not if you're really going for the big power move.
Is that what it is? You're waiting for your moment.
Yeah.
Okay, hang on to that thought. You're waiting for your moment.
Yeah.
You want to self-reveal at the perfect moment,
Yeah,
right?
right?
Okay, hang on to that thought. We'll come to that. Here's another passage, Mark 3. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. He had healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to just touch him. Whenever the evil spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." But he gave them strict orders not to tell others about him. I mean, if I was casting demons out, I'd be like, yeah, you heard that guy? You heard that? The demons know me, people. And everyone's freaking out. If you don't believe me, I'm going to send a demon into you. So this is power at his disposal. And he says, don't say anything. Because he wants to wait for the right moment. And we'll come to that in just a little bit. It goes beyond that. You remember that bit in the middle of Mark where Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" What does Peter say?
Well, some people say you're Elijah, and some
Yeah.
people say you're Jeremiah or some other guy.
Right. And Peter says,
Jesus said,
You're the
"You
Messiah."
say that."
you're the Messiah. You're the Messiah. You know what Jesus does right after that? Jesus warned them not to tell anybody about this. He said, don't tell anybody that I'm the Messiah. I mean, this is like, what are you doing, right? And so that this mystery keeps mounting and it doesn't end. You have the transfiguration, you remember that? He goes up the mountain and Elijah and Moses show up and they have a little conversation about, who knows what. And then Peter, one of my favorite bits, proper translation really should be Peter, not knowing what to say, said, how about I build you a little booth? You're here. You can need some shelter from the elements, clearly. So I'll build you a little shelter, I don't think anyone actually said anything to him, He was just yakking over there. But, so this amazing thing happens. They come down off the mountain, and Jesus tells the disciples, don't tell anybody about this until after I rise again. So that was something hidden going on in the story.
It's always interesting in the text, and I think the New Testament maybe is more like this than the prophets are, but you get these little glosses or asides where the narrative is interrupted by the writer saying, and he did this because.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really powerful and important little things that pop in that you can find as you go through. He did this because that's not part of the story.
Mark doesn't do that stuff. Mark lets you hang.
Mostly.
Yeah, he lets you hang there. You got to figure it out. Here's another one. And then a man with leprosy came to him, Mark chapter 1, and said, if you're willing, make me clean. And it says Jesus was indignant. And really the best translations we have go in two directions, and indignant captures sort of both. Two old strains. One says Jesus was moved with compassion. And the other strain says Jesus was moved with anger. And I can see both. There's compassion for the plight the man is in, and anger towards evil and the fact that he's an outcast, societal, all of that. So they're both possible, and the English translation tries to capture both with Jesus was indignant. And then he heals him. Be clean. And then it says Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. See that you don't tell anybody about this. Don't tell anybody. In fact, go to the temple and do the ritual cleansing thing so people will assume you got cleansed the other way. Don't point them to me. I didn't. So over and over again, I could keep giving examples. I'm not gonna. Over and over again, you see that he has the power to do astonishing miracles. The sense I get in Mark, and here's where it gets a little controversial. The sense I get in Mark is that he almost does miracles reluctantly. It's almost like miracles come out of him because he can't help it. He sees a need, he has compassion, he does it. But then he says, don't tell anyone, because if he doesn't want, hear this well, he doesn't want his miracles and wonders and signs to be the basis of his authority. He doesn't want that. Because you cannot have relationship with power. That's the crucial thing you've got to hang on to. You cannot have relationship with power. So you have a boss. The boss says, you want to come and hang out? Bring your wife, we'll have dinner together. So you go have dinner together. It's fun, it's convivial, you're having fun. But there is an overtone in this, right? You're watching your wife to make sure she doesn't screw up, because this is important. Don't drink too much, honey. Keep it down. We'll get some more afterwards. It's okay to flirt with the boss. That's fine, because that's helpful. No one's saying that. Do you understand that? Power and relationship, there's a tension there. And Jesus wants relationship. He wants trust. There's this really beautiful moment. He's coming down off the mountain of transfiguration, and the disciples are arguing over there. And he says, what's going on? Well, there's this man who has a son who has epileptic fits. He's got a demon or whatever. And they couldn't cast the demon out. Remember that? Jesus is angry at what is going on, but then he engages with the man. This is a very vivid moment. I can imagine them with the little boy passing out on the ground, and Jesus and the father together over the boy. And Jesus asks the father, how long has it been going on? How long has he been suffering? And I hear relationship, care. He's connecting with the Father, saying, what's going on? How long has it been going on? And the Father says, since he was whatever. And then Jesus says to him, the Father says to Jesus, if you can, please heal him. And Jesus, if you can. All things are possible if you believe. All things are possible if you trust me. And the man says, I do, help my unbelief. I trust you to help me. It's very personal interchange. And Jesus sees the man, there's a relationship there, there's a trust, an honest trust filled with, I don't know if you're going to, and then the healing, goes on. He goes to Nazareth, go back to his own people, and it says that he could not do any miracles there because there was little faith. There too I would translate that as they didn't trust him. They didn't want to see him because he's no familiar dude. They want to see him for who he is. And because there's no relationship there, that's his focus. It's not the doing of miracles. He does not do signs and wonders to create authority. This is very critical because in our world today, a lot of people teach the exact opposite. But Mark is very vividly clear on this. Signs and miracles and acts of power, it leaks out. You can't help it because this is God. But he's seeking relationship.
Where is when he's at the Sea of Galilee with the disciples after the resurrection?
John
20.
And he says about the miracle, he points to the same. He talks about the pile of fish laying there and says that they won't believe because of this, right? Something about the miracle, and he says it won't work.
Yeah, that's a different. Yeah, he does. Let me read you a quote from a guy called Rowan Williams. You know this name, Rowan Williams? He was the former Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the Anglican Church. Really great guy, wonderful scholar. Here's a quote. So he says, so perhaps we are beginning to get a little sense of what the real secret is in this gospel. The secret is that the event which will change everything, which will bring in the kingdom of God, which will forgive sins and release people from guilt and fear, is not an event brought about by naked power.
You should read that again.
The secret is that this event, which will change everything, which will bring in the kingdom of God, which will forgive sins and release people from guilt and fear, is not an event brought about by naked power. The God who's going to change everything, change forever the conditions in which humans live, is a God who is beyond power as we would like to understand it. It's a God who does not coerce belief or clinch arguments, but who repeatedly asks for relationship and trust. That's what's going on. Get a flavor of this. People often think that if God did something spectacular, show up and put this huge banner across the sky saying, hey, this is me. Then everyone's going to believe, right? Jesus says, I don't think so. And even if they did, that's not real. It has nothing to do with the kind of relationship So Jesus is out to change the world, not from the outside in, but from the inside out, starting with the human heart. And what he asks in very simple things is, will you trust me? Whatever you know about me, whatever little you know, will you trust that? We'll start there. Which brings us to the moment that Mike talked about. So Jesus is hiding his identity, right, from everyone. But then there's the right moment. The moment that you self-disclose who you are. I was at a conference in Chicago last week, and there was about 30 people. There were some people in the room that I deeply respect. Like, do you know Todd Hunter? Todd used to be the head of Vineyard after Wimber. And anyway, there were just people that I wanted them to think well of me. Okay, and of course,
should have taken you with you. I would have told him how great you are.
Anyway, no, the guy who ran the conference is a really good friend of mine, so he made a big deal out of me being there and introduced me, So I'm sitting there looking humble, and he's introducing me, and I am so focused on what he's saying and what he's not saying. You know what I'm saying? It's like I'm totally and then after he's done, I feel slightly happy and kind of disappointed. He didn't mention these things. You know, it would have been useful if he had. I should have given him a little note or something. The things that go on in our hearts. The things that go on within, anyway. So when you reveal yourself, you want the moment to be perfect, right? You want the moment to completely, fully communicate who you are. And so here's a clip from, I think I'm going to try to, you want to turn the lights down?
I think maybe the
Is that possible?
Oh, wait. Yeah.
Sit down.
Okay, I'm going to try and get this on. So this is Jesus revealing himself finally. This is the moment, okay?
Wow, video back then?
Yeah, they filmed it.
a selfie.
It's not actually going. I don't know what to do. It says it's playing, but it's not playing, so I don't know what to do.
Try it again.
Try again.
They have extras in number of
No.
Got a
Yeah.
photo bomb in the back.
Photo.
There.
Yeah.
So,
Is that possible? Yeah.
Is it playing?
there we go.
There it is.
What is the
Sound.
volume? So I don't know what sound.
It's just a-
I don't know where it would come from. Did you pause it? Have we ever played anything with sound on this? We've always done PowerPoint. I don't even know if we have.
You did that Spencer's intro.
Yeah, it did. It should go through the HDMI, right?
It should.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a.
You have your phone on vibrate?
Ah. Is that it?
It could be. Turn it up.
It turns up.
There you go.
This is such a great clip. Now it's not so great. But that's totally fine. This is how power works.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't know if that's going to matter.
It's not doing anything. There you go.
You can't understand what Steve said.
I was going to say that in English.
I hear it.
Eshalak Yeshwatzad Amar Lana En Ant Mashiach Bar Elachachai Ehuana Tatsumi Barnash Eter Bahemin Chayim Eter Bananis
What do you think?
That was his big reveal.
That's his big reveal. You see the powerlessness of the whole thing? Doesn't do anything. He just stands there. Sounds like an idiot. And he could have done something. He could have done some magical act of power. He didn't do anything. He sat there. That's from the Passion, you know that. And he at the place of complete powerlessness, he decides to disclose himself fully.
And two, they were trying to convict him and they couldn't do it.
Yeah.
They had witnesses that could not come to
That's right.
bring them to a verdict.
Right.
And I always thought he was goading them. Okay, since you can't do this, I'll do it. Yes, I'm God. Okay, kill me now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's giving them power in
Yeah.
a powerless way.
Right?
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they couldn't do it themselves.
Couldn't
The
do it
Bible says
themselves.
their witnesses disagreed with each other.
Yeah.
But he said, okay, since you can't do it, yes, I'm God. You're going
Yeah.
to see me.
That's exactly right. And he's, in the fullest way, bearing witness to them of who he is. This is his moment. This is him inviting them to enter into relationship with him where there's no power. They have all the power over him. This is God putting himself under us, saying, will you enter into a relationship with me? Will you trust me? This is the kind of stuff that makes sense of Gethsemane too. You know, Gethsemane is like crying out if it's possible, and the Father is silent. And at that point, I think the Father and the Son, and who knows how to split all these things up. The Trinity is mystery. But the Son needs to trust the Father just as the Son is inviting all of us to trust him. The same kind of trust needs to happen there. And so he goes to the cross in the same trust because the Father isn't really helping him or nothing going on there. And even to the very end, he says, why have you forsaken me?
Mm-hmm.
He's still in conversation. He's still trusting. But he's expressing the agony of the situation of powerlessness. And then he dies.
It is the worst possible human condition, place I can imagine.
Yeah.
I hate it.
That's right.
It is utter faith.
Yeah, that's right.
There is no certainty in one sense.
Nothing. That was the core of the Passion, not the physical beatings. That's really bad. But yet, that's not the heart of it. Heart of it is this powerlessness, this ultimate powerlessness for one who has all power. In that moment, he has all power. He's choosing not to touch it and putting himself into the utter agony because he believes, and this is the heart of the gospel, that it's relationship that is going to transform and not power.
Mm-hmm.
It's relationship. It's this God who will do anything, even put himself into our power so we can kill him in order that we can have a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So if that is true, then we have to start thinking, how do we structure ourselves? If that is true, how do we structure ourselves? So they are walking up to Jerusalem, the disciples and Jesus, and they're on their way for all this to happen, right? And so Peter and John come to Jesus and say to him, Rabbi, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. No, they know he's going to die. You've got to have that in your heads. They know he's been talking about dying, and so they know something bad's going to come. And he says, okay, well, what do you want? And they say to him, well, when you reign in the kingdom, we want to sit one at your right hand and one on your left. We want the seats of power. And Jesus says, you know what you're asking for? And they say, oh, yeah, we do. He says, well, you don't really know what you're talking about. The cup that I drink, you really can't drink. So then the conversation moves on. And then the other disciples hear about it and they're indignant. Because they're like, wow, they got ahead of us, We should have been there. We should have put in our bid first. They are succession planning. That's what's going on. They're figuring out if he's going to screw up, something happens, who's going to lead? And if he comes back, then we want to have power. We want that real power. So to that, they still don't get it, right? I still don't get it. That's the journey I think I'm on constantly, every day. Today, I struggle with that. I struggle to understand this Jesus, this gospel, and then try to figure out what am I supposed to do as a pastor? How does this work? Because we still do church the way the world creates structures of power.
Since Constantine.
Yeah, we just can't help it. It's just how it is.
We went through this with commissioning Justin Bradshaw. When we started getting close to a decision on this, which has been 4 years coming, and we asked for feedback and say, okay, what do you think about this? There was a lot of feedback, lots of good feedback, lots of challenging feedback, some bad. I mean, just all very good. Good process. Tiring, fatiguing, but good, necessary. But the one thing that was coming was whether or not he fit the definition of a leader. But the definition that was being predominantly put forward was a very secular definition of leadership. And then we realized we're never going to hit this target because the natural sentiment category, you would never, if we picked the right person, no matter who it is, they wouldn't fit in that square, and then everybody would be on one level disappointed. So we had to do some work with those that were interested in being part of it, defining a Christian leader.
Yeah.
See how this dovetails on what we talked about the last time we were together? We put up the words brokenness, and weakness, and servanthood, and it's all about God's power, and even a dependency on God through community. So it's not about us, it's about the community. So this is so apropos to what we're talking about in terms of what a leader really is.
We actually have, I'll say this in the extreme, we actually have no idea how a person could possibly lead without power.
That's true.
We don't even want to be led by people that don't have power. We don't know. It seems impossible. I watched a clip, I could probably find it, we could show it, but I watched a clip of a guy who put forth an argument that Jesus changed the course of history and added this element of humility, which we kind of sprinkle in still. But he said before Jesus, it wasn't even part of the equation.
Yeah.
Your job was to acquire power,
Right.
never admit any kind of fault. As a matter of fact, if you did, people would be like, well, you're now disqualified as a leader. You can't. You have to. You have to grab the mantle of power, hold it, and smash those. And if you don't, then you're not even a good leader.
Yeah. And then we do it to this
We
day.
still
right?
live that way.
I mean, look at Calcutta. The council, it was all power. And it only makes sense. You acquire power and you use it for a good cause, for the kingdom. Yeah, this is my last bit and I'm done. And this is that last thing I want to leave with you is when they have this argument about power, here's what Jesus said. Jesus called them together, like he calls us together. And he says, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their leaders exercise power over them. That's how it works. But not so with you. It shall not be so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. He's saying in the kingdom, it's entirely upside down. So the ambition you have in your heart to be first, well, go to the bottom as fast as you can. It's not even go to the bottom so that you can then go to the top. No, that's where the action's at. If you want to follow me, go to the place of utter powerlessness and then bear witness of me. And what model in the church does that?
Well, I don't even know how it can even work. I struggle with that personally right now. I'm literally on a quest to divest myself of every power that I have. I'm trying to become. I was challenged by this verse I shared, this sentence that I share with you. Become a person of no reputation. I think that's the best way to go about it. But as I move toward that, it's like impossible to keep things going. You know what I mean? And then I find myself thinking, oh, and if this works, I'll become the most popular because of my non-reputation.
Yeah.
I'll be the best non-reputation. I mean, it's
You
like
have a
it's
good
like,
reputation.
you can't escape it.
Yeah.
I can't escape it. It's like I want to give it away.
Yeah.
I know that's right. Give away the power. If I do it well enough, maybe I'll be the one guy.
That's right.
It's just there.
That's just there.
It's there.
That's the daily struggle we have as his followers, and then even more as his under shepherds. That you cannot turn his
Doesn't
line
that
in.
kind of be like? I mean, he's God, and he can do that because he's God. We can't do that because we're not. And for us to even maybe strive to be that takes away from who he is. That's our job, is to point people to, hey, this is how he did it. This is who he is. Not, let me show you what it would look like, because I can do it too, or I can even try to do it.
And yet the church is pastored. I'm a little nervous about the idea that we're just going to give up here. It can't be done, because it is done.
It is done. It has
all
to be.
the time. And we can look at the history of the church from the resurrection until now and see it being done. And there's two lessons in it, just like your two threads, that one is these miracles happened. Francis gave everything away and went and rebuilt the church. Bernard gave up all of his power in order to have the gospel preached to the barbarians. And we can go on and on. Mother Teresa said, okay, I don't need any of this. I'm going to live with these people where they're living. Well, example after example after example. William Carey and Hudson Taylor. And then every time that happens, somebody comes right along behind it and says, now, we're going to build us an institution so we can do this over and over, and I'm going to be in charge of it.
That's right. That's
For
right.
every Francis, there's a Bonaventura who writes a book and gets to be the head of something.
Yeah.
So we have that, but the miracle is being people
Yeah.
and pastoring it happens. And y'all pastor already.
Yeah.
You are already pastors.
Can I say to you that I hear what you're saying, and yet the invitation is for us to do what he did. And we can do it because there's no real tension between the divine and the human. It fits, and because the Holy Spirit, we have him in us. Many times the church falls apart because we say one thing and do another. People say that about us all the time, right? So I think for me, how I'm trying, and I fail. I am so good at acquiring power and using it. I really am. And what I try to do is I try to keep my heart in this place, and then I invite those around me who are in my world to point out where I could perhaps move, because they'll tell you, hey, when you said this, it felt like that. And so to be open to others speaking into that. If we could, if we could invert the church and say, we are. If Mike is your pastor, then his role is to serve you for real. And then you get to go out and find others to serve for real. And then when you invite people into the church, you're inviting them to come into this radically countercultural world where you're not going to come and acquire positions of power and move up the ladder in this hierarchy. You're going to come and start serving. That's different. It also cuts against a mindset where you want to attract a lot of people to come immediately. Because if you want to bring a lot of people, they won't buy this sort of stuff. It's got to be relational. It's got to be someone saying, you served me. I get that. Oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. Yeah, okay. So that sort of, that's the call.
I think that's what I was thinking of, like, as we were talking about all the things that he was doing with miracles, and then he was like, don't tell anyone, because it's easy for people to be attracted to those
That's right.
miracles and not to him.
That's right.
And then why the power is so
That's
powerful
right.
when he says, when he gets to the point of being so humble, it's like everyone turned.
Yeah.
It's back, that's really where it's the most powerful.
So the things that
But that what he said, you got to write that down. When everyone turned their backs on him. That's when he was utterly powerless. That's the most, it's the most vivid understanding of who he is.
But I think even now, like, people who you're trying to attract to that, they want those miracles.
Yeah.
But really, the most important thing is the relationship.
Yeah.
when we're analyzing ourselves, when we're submitting to the Spirit to weed out the things that you're trying to weed out are those places where it's the miracle, or it's the money, or it's the status, or it's the political influence that we're attracted to. Or we either what we want for ourselves, or we think I'm going to attach myself to this other person because they're have one of those, and that's where we get in the wrong track. Always those things that the world wants, the church needs to turn away from.
Greg Boyd does a book, a study about this, where he says Jesus Christ came and conquered the world by submitting to their authority. He uses the relationship based on love. When we serve people with love, he says Jesus comes into the political scene, and they say, "Hey, you need to be the king. When are you going to take over Israel? What's going on?" He says he submits to death because my acts of love that I'm teaching you are going to change everything. And it's not something that can't be stopped.
Yeah.
I mean, how long was Russia Marxist atheist?
Yeah.
70 some years.
Yeah.
It's now considered one of the most Bible or God believing, fearing countries in all of Europe. And you can't stop it. It's
right. Yeah, that's right.
So why does this matter?
We need to weed out the power-hungry stuff in our own hearts. Doing God with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's for the church. For the saints.
I think the core was what you said about kind of serving. I think I know if I'm honest with myself, when I am in that serving mode, or when I'm kind of putting others first, that's when I usually see God working the most.
Reason for that.
Yeah, so we get quick to put all these things and have all these structures and different things in the church, but really when we just kind of put ourselves in servitude, that's usually when we see God move in people's lives.
I think it's fascinating, sorry, how yes, that incentivize us to serve in that verse by saying the last will be first. Oh, good. There's okay. Oh, I can serve that.
I'll get there.
Yeah, eventually. I'm in.
I'll eventually be
Yeah.
first.
Well, even it's coming to Christ. It's about saving me. It's not about look what he did, and look who he is. Based off of that, I'm going to deny myself and do all these things. No, I think in the end it's, I don't want to spend eternity in hell. I want to spend eternity in heaven. So I think it's very human and just awful to think. I think if you get far enough down that rabbit trail, you're never ever going to be able to move during the day. I'm like, well, everything's going to be from a wrong motive. But
Yes, that's
just kind of recognizing that. I mean, like, yeah, even though the motive's wrong, I don't think we can ever have a pure motive. I don't think that's going to happen on this earth. So we just keep going and try to emulate Christ, but knowing that, yeah, it's him, not me, because I can't do anything. So the moments, the glimpses of it you have, that definitely not me.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And when I look at that picture of him at the trial, him doing it that way, to me, is he knows how we were built. He knows what we were made of. He knows that he built us with this desire to look for something that we don't have that we need to complete us. And I don't, at the core, believe that that's power. We struggle for that because we're trying to find something. But I think it is this desire in our gut to be loved no matter what we are, for all of our junk, that we are utterly loved and rescuable and lovable despite it. And when I sit down and somebody wants to have a debate over some theological issue or whatever, and I think, okay, well, who's going to win here? I don't really know. I don't know enough to win for sure. But I really don't think that's what anyone's looking for.
Right.
They're looking for
Right.
that piece to be completed.
Yeah.
And he did it that way because he knew that's how we're wired.
Yeah.
I got to come at you from the lowliest place to show you how much I love you. I love you enough to put myself here, looking like this and acting like this and giving up all authority and power that I have over you to show you that.
Beautiful.
And so then when I look at for myself, what do I do on a daily basis and how do I lead? And yes, I should be a servant and I should do all the, I don't know that it matters because people aren't looking for me. They're not looking at me. They're looking at Jesus. And everything that I should do and say and be should point to that, but not because of me. It has nothing to do with me.
This week I heard a Lutheran pastor make a statement in a website or something. It was a lady pastor, but she said the opposite of faith is not doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. And that's powerful because I've been searching for that.
That's such a Lutheran thing to say.
But no, I mean,
Yeah.
let's watch a debate, because I've been watching Catholics versus Protestants. Who's right? Let's watch. Let me get the popcorn. I love that stuff on YouTube.
Yeah.
Scott Hahn is good, by the way. Scott Hahn
He is
no
good,
joke.
yeah.
But anyway, that's not the point. But I'm searching for something that you're not going to find. So I have to pick one that basically I can live with and follow Jesus.
I would say you're searching for something that I'm afraid you'll find, and that would mess you up.
What do you mean?
That certainty. And people get there; they get to places of certainty, and now the game is a whole different thing. I have a friend who's, in his honest moment, says to me, "I need power, because if I don't have power, no one actually will care for me. When you take the power away from me, I won't have any friends because they won't want to be around me." So you're right. There's a hunger to be loved, and so we come at it so many different ways.
And we're all going to look for it in some way. Power is fleeting. It's not.
The kind of relationship we can get through power is not the kind of relationship that we were made for.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
I think that's what's hard about my relationship with Spencer right now, is that relationship on one level used to be built on, I know it's a stretch a little bit, on power, in that I managed his life. Where he was and what we talked about was on my terms. I could force the relationship when I wanted to, and now it's on his terms by design. And it's now it's lacking. It's not the same relationship. In some ways, it's in a space of almost non-relationship. And I can't do anything about it. I mean, I could, but I don't. I can feel that I want to make it so. I had brought up that one in terms of power before, but I've given that power away. I've given the power of our relationship to him. And where I use the power to build a relationship, he's not.
And that gets even more when they get married, because God's instruction are to leave and to cleave, which really leaves a parent powerless. Because they have to go. Like my daughter will sometimes say, "Oh, I need to check with Scott," and she's absolutely right. But she's not checking with Dad anymore, and she's right.
Yeah.
I'm in that interesting space in that because I'm not married, but I'm older.
Yeah.
And my dad actually said to me probably a month or so ago, he's like, "Oh yeah, I forget that you're not 19. I'm like, "Yeah, no, I'm 35. I don't actually have that." You do something completely different than my sister who is married, because she has that person and he still is in that struggle. Like he wants to be that person, but he's not, and I'm in that weird space of like.
I had a moment yesterday morning, if I can briefly share. I have a new job. I'm in Pickerington, Ohio, doing some stuff. And I was supposed to meet a guy at 7:30, and I'm driving to Pickerington from my house. And he texts me about 7:15, "Oh, I'm going to be late." So, okay. So I said, "Well, I'm going to stop at Starbucks in Pickerington." So I go to Starbucks, and the drive-through line is very long. So I get out of my car, and I look. There's literally right beside the drive-through, the building. This is not in the country. It's about a thoroughfare. There's buildings everywhere. There's a huge gate, massive, bigger than this room, and it says Pisgah Cemetery. There's a cemetery you could sit in your car in the drive-thru and throw a rock and land in the cemetery. So I got my drink, and I got in my car, and I drove away, and I came back. And I parked, and I walked up in the cemetery, and I was just so struck by that. And I felt like the Lord was speaking to me. Here are people that are driving by to go to work. I mean, this busy commercial. There's a man that was buried there in 1872. And I got very reflective. I have, because my life has been so busy in my old job, I really neglected being a father. My daughter's having some serious problems in school. I didn't know that. And I wept in my car for her. 20, 30 minutes. Yeah, I asked the Lord to forgive me for driving by and not taking the time to see what's there in my marriage and other things. Pardon me, but when it comes to power, that's been there too. I've always looked at it, my relationship with my children is while I'm in bed, they're going to do what I say, I'm trying to do what's best for them. But there's more than that. We've got to get in there and see what's going on. Since I've been home a lot more, my daughter is just, oh gosh, she's driving me nuts. She's
I just think that's where you were going, but
Yeah.
No, but and my wife said to me yesterday, do you see what she's doing? Her daddy's home. And I wasn't neglecting her, I was just working all the time. But now I'm off at 4, home at 4:30 every day. We do homework. And she's hanging on me. Yesterday I couldn't, I'm trying to talk to my wife and she's jumping on my back and I said, Bella, what are you doing? And my wife said, don't you see she's happy you're home? So the Lord, I had a moment there at the cemetery. And I feel like I've done that personally where we're just too busy. I don't have time to, no, we need to take the time. If I have to get up at 4 in the morning, I'm going to get up there. I'm going to sit. I'm going to pray. And help me to focus on what's important. And it goes in line with what we're talking about today. That's why I wanted to share it.
it's very true. Very true.
Thank you for sharing.
I didn't mean to.
When I think of the people that lead, whether it's in your home, like Bella, or it's at work, or it's in ministry, allowing, I think there's a part of us that wants to love people by taking power from them. We think we're loving them well by not letting them have power. By not saying, you are a pastor, you can do this, you are a leader, you can do this, you're gifted in this way, so use it. We think we're caring for them by keeping the power in us or making them dependent on us for association, or a life group leader, whatever. We think it legitimizes more, it keeps them safe, it keeps them in a space where they're covered and they can rely on us and they can get resources for us and we think that's loving, not realizing that's the exact opposite of what Jesus was saying to his disciples.
Again, another reason that we've talked a lot about asking questions. It really doesn't put the power with us. It releases it to them. And then they get to discover more about Christ as opposed to making us a big deal. I've got the answer. And how many times do I struggle and say, yeah, let me tell you what. Well, that's not releasing that power. It's making me a big deal.
That's why the church took away the Bible, right? Because they didn't trust people to have access to that power and have access to the Holy Spirit. It took that all away to protect them. It's not loving.
So let me look back to, there is a question that remains, which is, you do know it's about relationship and not power. You do know that the kind of relationship that power creates is not the kind of relationship that Jesus wants. You know all that stuff. And you want to release the power, but at the end, you still need to use power. We're not an anarchy, It's not like, well, do whatever. At the end, there is some order, and the church does have some structure. There is some order, but then it very pointedly asks the question: how will you use power, and how will you guard your heart from the stuff that comes along with using power? So those are two questions that I'd like to leave with you to think about. How will you use power? What legitimates it? What is a Jesus-like use of power? Then how will you guard your heart from the stuff that comes along with it?
And what about whose power are you using? Are you using your power? Are you using his power? Because there is power
Absolutely.
to be used.
Absolutely. It's a very, very good question.
The Sermon on the Mount, beginning in Matthew chapter 5, if you want to turn there, has become somewhat of a manifesto for me in all that we're doing, and doing as a church. Is that the right way to put that? I don't think so. It's continues to shape me, and one of the things that I continue to fight in myself is how God continues to shape me. Ultimately, is how God is continuing to shape the church, shape Vista. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not comfortable with power, by the way, either. I don't. The most challenging part of that whole conversation for me, and interestingly enough, it's been emerging in my heart and in my life for a couple months. I don't know if you read the blog I wrote a few weeks ago about Oregon and guns, but the center point theme of that entire writing was our problems, our struggles all stem from power. I didn't even really understand what I was saying when I said that, although I knew it was true. And God's been bringing a lot of different things. You know how that happens. You know, sometimes when God's moving and communicating something to your heart, it starts coming from left field. You know, you think, where do these things come from? When Bobby said, hey, I think I'm going to talk about power this morning, it's like, wow, that's no surprise, really. But the most challenging part for me in that whole dialogue is, how will you use power? What I've been coming up against as the lead pastor is, as I continue to try to divest myself of power, I can see I've been struggling with this reality that if I give it all away, then what it is we're trying to do will actually dissolve. So there's this like really weird, if God's doing something, it's similar to where you were saying, Michelle. It's like, if God's given you something, if He's entrusted you with something, you think about it even in terms of, if God's given me $1 million, what I do with that $1 million, there's power with that. There's you could leverage it. There's certain things you could do a lot of things with that. If I just give it away, now what? That's not stewarding it. Stewarding is not. You don't just give. You got to do. There's something to be done. There's ways to leverage it. There's right things to do with it and wrong things to do with it. Even in my own gifting, I've always been very resistant. It's like, I've had people. Gary's told me. He said, "Who are you to deny the gift that God's given you, whatever they are?" And it can be said to anybody. I have this. It's really, there's something actually wrong there. It seems right that I would want to deny my gift and deny the role that God's given me and give away power. And there's something that resonates that people say, oh, that's great, you're not a power. But there's also something that I'm avoiding. It feels like there's something that I'm not owning, I'm not taking the responsibility that God's given me. You know, it's like there's that stack of money and I'm like, well, I'm not touching it because it's power and that's not good for me, so I'm just going to leave it laying there. It's been very interesting. So I don't know how I got off on that tangent. Where I started was the Sermon on the Mount is become very shaping. I think what I said was that as God shapes me, so He shapes Vista. I'm uncomfortable with that. I'm like, why would that be true? But it's true. And I wanted to, for some of you, we've walked through this before, maybe even personally. We have walked through it as a church. But I wanted to walk through this chapter, mostly chapter 5, and then peeking into the rest of Sermon on the Mount. And I just want to keep this a part of your dialogue because this is very much, it's not just who Vista is. I believe the Sermon on the Mount shapes the church at large. But I wanted to kick through this. I'd also like to turn it into an opportunity for you to feed back into it because I'm going to actually be teaching this at a conference next weekend. And I don't do conference speaking. It's different. It's a different deal altogether. You have to be a little bit more extroverted. I like speaking to our church because I have a relationship with our church, and we have history for the most part, and we've been growing together, and so I like speaking into that space, trying to generate a relationship with 400 or 500 people in 10 minutes. It's not something I do regularly, so I don't do it very well. But I wonder, even as I go through this, whether there might be some things we could talk about that you might be helpful to me as I deliver some of this to 500 or 600, and then it's just college students, which I don't feel particularly adept at reaching either. So the whole thing, the guy called me and I said, no, absolutely not, I'm not doing it. He talked me into it. So starting in Matthew chapter 5, the Beatitudes, commonly referred to as the Beatitudes. This is Jesus talking to a whole bunch of people that followed him up to a mountainside, and they are probably a pretty diverse group, but by and large, those that are most attracted to Jesus are those that have been mostly ignored in society. They have no power structure, to stay with that theme. They've been rejected, and Jesus is doing the very thing that he was called to do, which you see in Luke chapter 4, right? Isaiah 61 called back that he is called to reach the oppressed and the imprisoned and all that. So he's got this group of fairly ragtag, they don't have a lot, and they in some ways probably see an opportunity. Here's someone who does care about us. Here's someone who is telling us the opposite of what we've been told most of our life. In addition to their status also brought with them a stigma that they were ungodly. That because they were unloved by society, because they were unloved by those that were in power, they were unloved by God. And Jesus is telling them here, right off the bat, you that have been told you will not be blessed because you've not been able to keep the law, you've not been able to do the things you need to do, you're sick. He's saying you are blessed. It's just huge, massive. I don't know if you can imagine that, but I'm sure you've had times in your life where you were discouraged, and if you've been there and your sponge is totally dry, when you get that, it's deeply meaningful. So these people are attaching to Jesus in a big, big way. And he starts by saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And he finishes it by saying, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I've looked at this over the years and realized there's these bookends, even on the Beatitude. So within the Sermon on the Mount, and even in this very first passage, there are brackets on this thing. And the front end of the Beatitudes are, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Blessed, if I oversimplify it, blessed are the humble. And we've been talking about this for the last few weeks. You don't know really your rescuer, the rescuer, unless you need rescued. A part of the sermon tomorrow is going to say that. There's a passage that says, Jesus says, if you love me, you'll obey me. Those who love me, obey me. It seems like you can't even separate the two. If you love me, you will obey me. So if you look at your life and you think it's not aligning with Jesus, what he asks us to do, you really have to, the question isn't, how should I obey more? The question really is, why don't I love him? If I love him, I would obey him. You think about the things that we love. I love my son. I love Schaefer, and I love him as a soccer player. And what happens as a result of that love? Well, I organize my whole day around the game. I make sure nothing's going to get into that thing. I pack my clothes according to what I need to wear that game. It's going to be colder. I've got a camera set up so that I can, and a tripod so I can, in very stable, and I can capture that and remember it later and watch it again and again. I mean, there's so many obediences, actions that come out of the fact that I love. The question really is, okay, how much do I love him? And our love for Jesus comes in this needing rescue relationship. if there's no recognition that I need rescue, if there's no recognition that I'm going under, I can't make it in this world or the next, there is no kingdom for you. He is not the king. You're not in that kingdom. You enter that kingdom through humility. And then on the other end of that, you see, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. They're persecuted because of righteousness. Righteousness. We understand righteousness only comes by one way. We are granted righteousness by God through the work of Jesus. Not by anything that we do. Again, it's the same thing. We're utterly rescued. Why? Because of I'm oversimplifying, right? Because of what Jesus did. Maybe it deserves to be oversimplified. You're persecuted because of righteousness. In our case, you're going to be persecuted. In their case, even, you're persecuted because of righteousness that you actually haven't earned. That's why the establishment would persecute someone who was righteous, because they aren't righteous. You aren't righteous. You're not keeping the law. How could you? No, I'm righteous because of one thing, because of Jesus. Oh, that's going to bring you persecution. You can't say that that's. So on the opposite ends of this thing, I think are the whole gospel is right there. It is humility. It is I need rescued. And there is a rescuer. And that rescuer makes me righteous. The doorway to the kingdom life is humility and Jesus. It is the rescuee and the rescuer. And then what you see inside the kingdom, verses 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, quite simply put, is this divine exchange going on. Blessed are those who mourn. Mourning it's a temporal activity. It's an activity we do here right on the earth. I mourn for you, or typically relational, right? I'm mourning. I mourn for you. And then it says, I'm comforted. By whom? Who comforts? Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. But it's presumed you'll be comforted by who? God? Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the behave. And we can talk about what it means to be meek, but it goes beyond the point of what I'm trying to suggest here. For they will inherit the earth. Who's going to give them the earth?
God.
Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. These are things you can do. You can mourn. You can be meek. You can hunger and thirst for righteousness, and you'll be filled. Filled by whom? You can be merciful. That's an action. That's a behavior. That's an obedience. You can be merciful, and you'll be shown mercy by who? Blessed are those who are pure in heart. Blessed are those who are single-eyed in their devotion. It's something that you can on one level do. And when you do, you will see God. By how do you see God? Who's going to permit you to see God? Who's going to expose you to that? He is going to do it himself, right? Blessed are the peacemakers. You will be adopted. Adopted by whom? Called sons of God. You see what I'm saying? It is so you enter the kingdom. You enter this place where Jesus is king. Right, we talked about that. The Gospels, if nothing else, are the narrative that show how Jesus spent his life establishing himself as the king. And that's what we see all through the Gospels. Who is king? He had control over everything. Control over weather, seas, control over disease, control over the demons. He established himself as king. Do miracles in all those cases, yeah. So we have a king, and we're invited into that kingdom. And the threshold for that kingdom, the entry to that kingdom is humility and Jesus. It's rescue. It's the rescue. And then inside the kingdom, so with Jesus King, we are called to respond to Him in love and with regard to other people. And when we behave in these ways for other people, there's this divine interaction. Do you see what I'm saying there? You see what's happening? You behave, in one sense, horizontally like this. You mourn, you're meek, you hunger and thirst for righteousness, you're merciful, single-eyed. And when you do that, God moves. Pretty wild.
I like that. Can I say something about that?
Please.
I love the tension that we've been going over about the gospel. We can't please God. We've been preaching that for what, like a couple weeks.
Yeah.
And we can't gain God's favor.
Yeah.
It's only by grace and faith, the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, post salvation, we enter into a relationship. Still can't gain God's favor. That can't be done.
Mm-hmm.
But as His adopted son, we've got to do these things.
Yeah.
There is a behavior part to it.
Yeah.
So there's a tension there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes some people either go too far. It's all
That's
behavior
right.
or it's all God. Well,
That's right.
there's a tension there.
Yeah.
It's faith, grace by faith, obviously.
Yeah.
But post that,
Yeah.
I don't go to my wife and say, legally we're married, so I can smack you in the face. That's okay because
Yeah.
we're married. It's good. It doesn't matter what I do now.
Yeah,
Because
right.
we're married,
You
right?
have
It just
to
doesn't
stay.
matter.
Yeah.
I'm moving out for a week. I'll be back. It doesn't matter what I do because we're married. We're married. No, it's not true at all.
Yeah.
It's the same with God. There's a relationship there that we have to.
Yeah.
In all through the Old Testament, New Testament, if you do this, I then will do this.
Yeah.
If you do this, I then will do this.
Yeah.
God says that all throughout the
Yeah.
So I love that tension that we have to kind of play around with.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
Yeah. So we're talking about this Sunday is like, where does obedience come into the equation? We can't rely on it, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, what we see is in those of the various obediences, when we obey, it is a sense of getting into that, staying into the spirit of the whole thing, the whole transaction. It's like that Rich Dargenio talked about it, getting in that river, right? I talk about it too at Hilliard, but he did a better job of it. I listened to him. You're getting in that river, you're in that, and then there's this way that it goes. And I feel like that's what Jesus sets up right up front for these people. It's like, yes, this kingdom is one that you can be a part of. And look how it works. I wouldn't want to go as far as to say that we control it, but there is a sense of, wow, when I step in faith toward another person, when I behave, when I operate, when I obey in the way that Jesus taught me, I am stirring, at the very least, I'm stirring this eternal move. It changes life completely. It takes it from just being temporal to this internal infusion that's going on, infusion all the time. You're in this kingdom way.
What do you do with the, if you do this, then you're blessed. So, what do you do when somebody comes and they're not operating in the way God would want them, but they want a Christian way?
Mm-hmm.
Is there an act of obedience where we're not going to sleep together.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make that move because I want that blessing from them.
Mm-hmm.
Is there? How do you answer that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this says blessed,
Yeah.
And is there a correlation? Because I have a hard time wondering if you do this, then God's going to bless your marriage.
Mm-hmm.
But you understand my question?
Yeah, I find that we get those kind of questions all the time. We find ourselves in situations where we're a grace-rich, mercy-filled people, yet there are people in the midst that are behaving badly or behaving wrongly, and where there's either opportunities for correction or direction, but there's also people coming that are saying, hey, what are the rules? You know, I know this person or these folks and they're living in this way and they're a part of the church, and what do you have to say about that? Why are you going to correct that? Are you going to deal with that sort of thing? It's an ongoing tension. To make a long story short, the thing that we try to do is make sure that when we get into those spaces, that we don't just exclusively operate on the Mosaic side of the ledger, where we develop biblical rules and biblical guidelines and then ask people to abide by them. There are biblical guidelines, there are ways to live, but it's not entirely right to just articulate those and then ask people to abide by them. There's no Jesus in that, there's no real love in that. It's just, and the thing is, there's a lot of people that really just want that. Just tell me what I'm supposed to do and I'll do it. There's a lot of academics out there and those that aspire to the good grade. Whatever it takes for me to get an A+ in God and in religion and in church, whether just tell me what it is and I will do it. I'll be glad to do it. And there's something very genuine and very honest about that. But there's no real connection to the gospel in that. That's purely Mosaic. So we're always trying to overlay those kinds of obediences in the gospel context or into a love context. And I've used this example before if you've heard me. There's a certain way that I want my son to behave with his girlfriends. Either one of my sons in this case, at this point is the deal. How you deal with, how you live with them, you know, on a daily basis, how you interact with them, what you do, what you don't do together. And I could lay out a list of things and I could help him, either one of them, define their moral guidelines, and we can all together commit, and we can get buy a trinket and say, here's the thing that we're going to, the promise ring for the girl or the whatever. I don't even know what you get. It's like, okay, you're committed to these frameworks and we're not going to break those things, and you can do that. And now it's just a matter of willpower. Or I can help my sons understand who this woman is, who made her, and how she's made, and what God's best is for her, and where she's going to end up one day, and what you can do that is absolutely best for that person, most loving for that person, most sacrificial for that person, and start to think about it rather than what I do and don't do, and what I can do to make this person all that they can be, or I don't know how to say that, but protecting that person for, we even, I think, are you going to marry her? And sometimes the first girlfriend says, yeah, but realistically, is that going to happen? What are the odds of that? Not so much. Okay, so you're not going to. So somebody is. So if the odds are you're not going to marry them, then part of your job is to have that person be ready for the one that they marry. Well, that's utterly unselfish. That has nothing to do with my relationship. You know what I mean? But that's a totally different conversation. Every one of the potentially Mosaic conversations that people want to have with me or a leader about what do we do and what do we don't do can be rooted in the gospel. It can be rooted in some other place than just what you do or you don't do. I don't even know if I'm answering your question at all, Gary, but it goes from something other than a contractual, if you do this, you will be blessed. Is that true? Yeah. If you live these ways, then life will be better. God will bless you in that sense. But it's not the whole thing now. It's much deeper than that. And we have to include that gospel level sacrificial love, which all of the rules are tied up in, right? Everything comes down to love. So you have to base it on that, not just the rules. But there's certainly an argument to be made that if you lived according to Mosaic law, if you lived according to rules that were, made from a biblical perspective, I mean, sometimes even, I don't know if you could argue even not in a biblical perspective, but rules that are made from a healthy motivation, you're going to be better. You could argue that for sure, but it's not the full thing. Without the full thing, we're missing a whole bunch of good stuff.
Well, I always get caught up to like what these actually mean. Like, they will inherit the earth. Well, what does that look like? What does that mean? When people say to be blessed, what does that look like? And I feel like we a lot of times jump to very earthly definitions of some of these things. So that's why I don't know, I'm always and maybe it's just for my own self, so I don't get so I'm not so I'm not upset when it doesn't look like what I want it to look like, or I take this like,
when the equation doesn't quite work out exactly right, I did that and this is supposed to happen.
Well, yeah, I'm like, we get these expectations that it looks a certain way, or I'm going to be nice to these people, and in return I'm going to get that back, or I'm going to do these things, and not even in the motivation that I'm going to get something back, but then down the road you keep doing that over and over again, and like you get this entitled. Even if in the beginning you weren't entitled, if you continue doing that, you're like, I've been so merciful. Why am I not being shown mercy by people around me, or in these circumstances where I want to be shown mercy? So I don't know. I know for me personally, I'm just not that I don't skip stuff like this, but it's like it's really hard for me to engage verses like this, because I start putting my own definitions on what those are supposed to look like in my life, and very rarely do they look like that.
I think you could do a sermon or more on each one of them. And maybe part of the motivation for why I approach it the way I do, which is often the case with Scripture. Sometimes I think we get way too close to it. And there's good in that, but to back up and go, Jesus was talking. He was setting a tone. There's nothing even written. He's talking. And if you put yourself in that situation and you can't even remember exactly what Jesus said, if you're sitting there later that day, you'd be like, what did he say? Well, he said, I can belong. He said, I could be a part of it. And he seemed to suggest that if I follow him, that there's going to be something that's going to come to me as a result of following his ways. There's something that's going to happen. There's going to be something eternal. He said things like, sons of God and inherit the earth and filled and kingdom. I will have the kingdom of heaven. Something much bigger going on here than my little life. But my little life, the little things that I do in this life with other people, seem to be evoking and stirring and fusing with this much bigger thing that's going on. So then he goes on to verse 13. He says, you're the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? And it's no longer good for anything except to be thrown and trampled up by men. And then you're the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. And why would you put that under a lamp? Let your light shine before men, so that God may see that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. So we see this invitation to this ragtag, outcast, oppressed group of people. You can be a part of this. There's an eternal transaction that you're becoming a part of as you're part of this new kingdom with this new king. And then he puts this really kind of enormous value on them. He says, you're salt and light. We take salt and light for granted. They did not. It was life in many ways. Without salt, you couldn't preserve your food. You could go into all the metaphors about salt and light. Light largely misunderstood even at that time. It was. We know that light goes into our eyes now. They really thought of it in one sense going out. Really, that light shone out. How could you see? Because something was happening like this rather than this being interpreted in our brain. So you think about being a light. It's like there's something about you. There's a salt. You're a salt that brings, and you're a light. You're shining light. You have this, again, from a 30,000 foot. You have this unbelievable value. You are not a dreg. You're not an outcast. You're not oppressed. You actually are invited into this kingdom. You're part of this eternal transaction, and you, who feel like you have no value, are like the elements of life that are of the greatest value now. Just mind-blowing stuff for these people. You're talking to the people that are not allowed in the kingdom. They are clearly not blessed, and they have no use. There's no use for you. Jesus is flipping it entirely upside down. You are light. God said in Genesis chapter 1, let there be light. God created light. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was God in the beginning. Through Him all things were made. Without Him nothing was made that has been made. Right? We're talking about the Messiah. We're talking about Christ. We're talking about Jesus. In Him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness is not overcome. Jesus is life, and Jesus' life is the light of all mankind. So you have God creates light, and Jesus is light. This is their understanding. Well, the light metaphor is massive for them. They barely understand it. They only know that God created it. We have nothing to do with it. And then he says, you are the light. What? I am the thing that God created? Somehow I am light? You are the light of the world, says in John 5:4, and then later here in 16, right? You're the light of the world. Amazing. Put yourself in these people's shoes, and mind equals blown. There's no way to almost even comprehend this. You've been told something utterly opposite your whole life, and you believe it. And then he goes on, he says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets, right? Because they're super excited about this, because now they're like, oh, great, because this is my whole life. I can't get away from the prophets and the law and all that stuff. And this is what's been burying me my whole life, is I cannot do what the priests do and the Pharisees do and the religious people do. I've not been able to, I can't hang. And he says, but don't think that I've come to abolish the law of the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not a smallest letter nor the least stroke of the pen will at any means disappear from the law until everything's accomplished. So they're thinking, oh, he's deviating away from this whole legal approach to relationship with God. I'm sure obviously they wouldn't be thinking that, but in their soul, right, they're thinking, oh, great, this is separating me from all of that oppression, all of those rules and regulations that I've not been able to accomplish. And he says, no, I'm not doing away with that. So they're super excited, and then now they're like, oh, backing up just a little bit, anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. We knew this was too good to be true. You're backing off. You were really on a roll, and now you're coming back. Whoever practices and teaches the kingdom will be called great in the kingdom. For I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses the law, or surpasses the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will not enter the kingdom. But I mean, you talk about pumping up the balloon, and it's like, and then boom, gone. I thought this was exactly what you were not telling us. And now you're saying, unless we're more righteous than the Pharisees, unless our righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees were as nearly perfect as you could get. And observed to be perfect. And in the rare case that they were not perfect, they went through the exhaustive rituals to make themselves perfect again. And he says, unless your righteousness surpasses the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Starts here. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for those is the kingdom of heaven. If you're humble, poor in spirit, right? If you're persecuted, which they certainly felt, kingdom of heaven. You do these things, God's going to bless you, right? You are salt, you are light. But if your righteousness surpasses the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. And so immediately they have to presume, well, I can't. I don't exceed the Pharisees. There's no way to do it. I've tried. So, what do we understand this to mean now? How does our righteousness exceed the Pharisees? What did Jesus say about the Pharisees? He said that they were hypocrites. That outwardly they were obeying the law, but inwardly they were corrupt. Jesus is calling his people to a degree of righteousness that exceeds the Pharisees, but a better way to put that would be that it's more pure, it's deeper, it's real, it's on a heart level, right? So then Jesus goes into all these examples, and he says, for example, anyone who murders is subject to judgment, but I tell you that anyone who's angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. He makes it a heart issue. To be greater than a Pharisee means to be actually righteous in your heart, for lack of a better way to put it. He says, look, it has been said, the Old Testament says, do not murder. The law says, do not murder. Does he take that away? Does he do away with the law? No, you must not murder. We don't murder. But he makes that a low bar. That's the low bar. You think about the Old Testament directive for giving is what? 10% tithe. What's the New Testament? Everything. Jesus literally says everything. It's a high bar. How do you give away everything? How do you give away everything? Craig Rochelle does great teaching years ago. The average gift that Christian gives to their church in America is about 2.5%. That's how much people will give to their church. Well, I thought that was high, actually, but you think about average. But that's the church going. Average church going, 2.5%. He says the goal is not to get people to 10%. The goal is to get people to think about the 97.5%. The question is, because here's what we do instead. We say, like an Old Testament approach, I gave my part, my God part. This is God's part. I gave that. And when I do that, that means now I can do whatever I want with this part. This is my part. This is the most powerful part about someone giving their 10% is it frees them up to be utterly selfish with the 90. And God says, no, I want all of it. So the Christian, the Jesus way of giving is, okay, you can give there, fine. But the question really is, what are you doing with every dollar that I have given you? What happens to it? How do you spend it? All of it. How do you spend it? So Jesus, and that's a heart issue. Now it's like, now I have to evaluate my life. Now I have to evaluate that purchase. Can I buy it? Yes. Is anybody going to fault me for buying it? Very few. Should I buy it? I don't know. I don't know. Does my salvation depend on it? No. So it doesn't matter. Yes, it does. It's like, now it's down in my heart. And that's what Jesus is saying. Yes, absolutely, do not murder. But I'm saying if you're angry, you are subject to judgment. If you murder, you're subject to judgment. If you're angry, you're subject to judgment. It's as though you murdered in your heart, if you equate it to the adultery, right? Do not commit adultery. It has been said, you have heard that it has been said. That is like saying, the law says, do not commit adultery. But I tell you that he says, now I don't say that it's okay to commit adultery, right? Because I love you, because you're saved because of grace and mercy, now you can commit adultery. Because you're saved by grace, it's fine. No, I don't. He says, listen, look, the law and the prophets I'm not abolishing them. I've come to fulfill it. I've come to fill it up, right? Do not commit adultery. Do not murder. But I'm saying that if you're angry in your heart, it's as though you've committed murder. If you have lusted in your heart, it is as though you have committed adultery. In either case, you will be judged. I'm not just judging your behavior. I'm judging your heart. And Jesus is driving them to a much deeper level. These people that he is inviting into the kingdom, he's saying, this is a different life. This is different than when you've been taught. This is not purely behavioral. In my kingdom, I am pressing you into a place of transformation. I want you to be made righteous through and through. And when you are in that space, when you are experiencing this eternal transaction, it's laid out in the Beatitudes. When you're obeying, you're living like my son, like he says, like I teach you, like I show you. He showed them. He taught them this not just in words. He exhibited it for them. When you behave this way, I move into that. God moves. You comfort, God comforts you. Bang, and that does something. That starts to press you down into your heart. And I want you evaluating. It's not just about murder. It's not about adultery. It's about when you're angry in your heart. When you're angry, I want something to happen down in that. I want to deal with that. When we get into that space, you are going to be salt and light to the world. You get into that mode, you get into that space, you get into that spirit, you get into that transformation, you get into that kind of stuff, deep, heart level, gospel, rescue, transformation, and now that does something to the world that's utterly different than what they experience anywhere else. So then the last point, the question is, how does Jesus, and what does Jesus do with, or how does he tell us to deal with the angry heart? So, the religious way, the predominant church way, the Mosaic way, right? Okay, it's wrong to murder. It's also wrong to be angry. What's the third thing? Shouldn't murder. Most of us don't do that. Not everybody. You would be surprised. You would be surprised. Shocked. But we're not supposed to be angry. So what do? Don't be angry. Just don't be angry. If somebody takes a swing at you, you don't swing back. That's our solution. Essentially, we think, that's what God says to do. Don't be angry. I don't murder. And now Jesus is saying, not only don't murder, we don't be angry. And every one of you are thinking, well, that's not actually working, right? Because I don't punch you back does not mean I'm not angry. As a matter of fact, the only way to not be angry is to punch you back. Right? Now it's fair. The Mosaic law, that's why it goes that way. If you punch me, I punch you. Now we're even. I'm no longer angry. That's what we think. So we have two choices. We either don't punch you back, and we just basically pretend we're not angry. That's the criticism of the church, right? That's why non-Christian people oftentimes don't like the Christian, is because you're saying you're not angry, but you seem pretty angry. But we think, well, that's what I'm supposed to do. This interesting thing, I learned this years ago. The things that Jesus teaches throughout the Sermon on the Mount are not dyads, they're triads. They're not two things, they're three things. There's always a third thing. You've heard long ago, don't murder. 1. I say to you, don't be angry. 2. 3 is not, don't be angry. Look. Therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, then come offer your gift. If I'm in church and I'm offering my gift, I'm bringing my tithe, my financial gift, I'm bringing my service, I'm bringing my leadership. I'm praying. And I remember that I am not right with my brother. I'm hurt. I'm angry. They're angry with me. I've hurt them. Right? You're at the altar and you remember. Don't continue with your, in one sense, relationship with me if you're not right with your brother out there. That's a joke. That's not right. You can I say this? You can't have a relationship with me if you're not committed to right relationship with your brother and your sister. Those two commandments are hard to separate, right? What is the greatest commandment? Well, the greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart. The second one is like it. Love your brother. Love your brother as your love your neighbor as yourself. Yeah. Right? So they're interconnected. He says, listen, leave it. Just leave it right there. I'm just trying to imagine what church would be like if we held to this. You cannot come to church if you're not right with your brother or your sister or somebody.
Okay, that's your church.
What?
Being empty church.
Yeah.
Or it'd be full and I'd be even sadder.
Well, you would hope that next Sunday, you would hope on one level, maybe next Sunday, in a vacuum, next Sunday it's full, but full of what? Who? People that have obeyed. They've made it right. They've humbled themselves. They've gone to the other person and they've mourned and they've comforted and they've been meek and they've shown mercy, and God has moved into the life and the heart is being transformed, and we come back to church and now we remember that we're frail and broken and that we've been rescued, and church is an utterly different place now.
But then you just have church every 2 weeks.
Yeah. That's why we have life group every 2 weeks.
The next week, right? Everybody's gone.
Everybody's gone again.
Yeah, but
Reconciling,
Yeah.
in the back.
Yeah.
if you have kids
And
on
that won't
Sunday
work.
morning, you're never going to make it to church.
Yeah.
You're going to have to, because you're all going to get into a fight before, during, or after. And anybody who's leading a group, right? When you're leading volunteers on Sunday morning, if you're trying to do practical ministry on Sunday morning, you probably ain't coming into church either.
Nope. So we got to get out of the chronological space as usual and start to think like Easterners rather than Westerners. And now we're talking about an attitude, right?
From California.
California. Yeah. We're talking about an attitude and a sense of responsibility, right? Of course. Now we would practice that. I'm at church and I'm reflecting and I'm praising and I'm trusting that God's going to speak, and we open the Word of God and He does speak, and I do remember what's going on, and I leave church and I go and I take care of it. But we don't. We go to lunch first, and we fill ourselves up, and we feel better when we're full. And the sense I was getting while I was in church wasn't as significant. And I'm not sure, really, I don't know if that was God. Because when I think about it, I've really tried. It's really in their court at this point. Matt.
It's never in their court. You have something against, you go. If you think they have something against you, you go.
Yeah.
I think you got to be careful though, because you go to somebody and you say, I'm really sorry, blah blah, and they kind of turn around and go, "What are you talking about?" So you do have to examine your heart in that instance. I would just forewarn you.
Yeah.
I'd rather do that than say, "Oh, they don't remember that," when they really did. I'd rather do that than, Mike's fine. He's not upset in what I said. Here we are. Then I'd rather go and say, "Hey, do you remember that? I should have done that."
Mm-hmm.
I found that in situations like that though, where like I feel like I've hurt somebody or I've like caused agreements in us, and they're like that didn't mean anything. I totally wasn't even okay. That didn't hurt, but that's good. It makes it a lot easier down the road when something does happen. You're like, all right, so we have this established relationship where we can talk to each other, and I wanted something has happened between us. There is something, and we're both feeling it on our heart. It's a lot easier for us to come to each other and say something than if it was just like, well, why haven't you ever apologized for anything else that you've done? I've seen that in relationships. My closest friendships, and I would even say probably the most powerful things have come out of those relationships when we're willing to come and say, listen, I was wrong to you. And I mean, and there was, I remember one specifically where we would go back and forth. We were fighting each other and never really raising our voices. It was we were struggling to even just be friends. And we finally sat down, and I think it was actually my roommate who sat the two of us down because she was kind of mediating for us. And she was like, listen, I can't do this anymore. You two need to hash this out. And I remember just the brokenness that came out of it, which was well, this is what I'm dealing with, and this is what you're dealing with. And they're clashing together, and we're not dealing with this with each other right now. And so it moved out of that. And I mean, she's a great friend, and it's great, but we both relinquished something, which was my needs are greater than your needs, and I need you to fill my needs while you're working from a deficit and I'm working from a deficit. And so I think just when you're honest and open about just the small things or the way you feel about how you're treating someone, it makes it a lot easier now when something big happens. It's never any fun, but may as well just do it. I apologize for something that I said to someone last night. She was like, I was joking. I was like, I think I was too, but I don't think it came across like that when it came out of my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
In a couple weeks. Go ahead, Gary.
In response to what you're saying here, I think it has, at least for me, more to do with me than even the instilled something in me in that humility, because you have beat down the pie to go and say, "Geez, I'm really sorry," because they didn't see the junk in my heart like I saw the junk in my heart. They just didn't see it, but I did.
Mm-hmm.
That's just deal with it. But,
I think what resonated with me about what you said was sometimes I've wanted to go and do that. And I get that I have to be humble. It is about me, and I have to be humble in that space. But I also have to love that person well enough to know if they're even going to be able to receive that in that time and in that space. There's got to be some, for me, there's got to be some processing of that, because they might not be at a place. I can't have any expectations going into that place if I do go, and I got to make sure that my motivation, even for going to them and bringing something before them, is loving them well, because sometimes they might not be ready to address it, and that's where I'm like, okay, well, what? I know I have to practice this, but it's my motivation here, and what are my expectations? And thinking through that before I just go, hey. It has to be more of a thought process for me.
I agree with you, because I was just thinking that way.
I don't know if that's what you were talking about, Peter, but that's what I got from what you said.
When Gary said that too, just about whether it's we feel like somebody else has wronged us or we've wronged somebody else, I think, like you said, it has to be a very prayerful process, because we could go to somebody that we feel like has wronged us, and because we're having that tension of that frustration or maybe bitterness or whatever it is, we're wrong when we're harboring that bitterness. So whether it's the proper time to go, because again, they may, the motivation behind you is, I want to apologize for my bitterness or whatever else, but then to them it's like, well, I didn't do anything to you. Like, they may not be ready to receive that. So, or both ways.
Or vice versa. I gotta be
Or
ready
vice
to
versa.
receive. Well,
Right.
that is your stuff. That's not
Right, exactly.
A couple weeks ago, I don't remember when. On Sunday morning, I was taking my kids to kids community, and Jess was in there, and because Jess, right, and she was, and I walked in, and I didn't look around as to what was going on. I had no concept of what goes into running a kids community, and I still don't. And I walked in, and I said, "Hi, Jess," and she didn't hear me because she was working. She was busy doing stuff. And I said, "Oh, I see. Okay, you're just not going to talk to me today. All right, I see how it is." I said that very loudly because I know Jess. And I could tell that really bothered her. And I'm like, oh, crap. So after church, I went up to her, and she's like, "I want to apologize." I'm like, "No, you don't. I'm going to apologize for being a jerk." In front, like she was like in the moment doing this stuff. And I didn't know that.
I snapped at him though. Like I was.
Well, and I had it coming.
Kidding me? Do you see what's happening?
And I didn't see. I was just walking in. You know how I mean. I'm not. So it was funny. I was like, Jess, and she's like, "No, I want to apologize to you." I'm like, "No, you're not. I'm going to apologize to you because I was wrong." And then she hugged me. She's so sweet. So the point is, don't ever talk to Jessica on Sunday morning until after church.
John, next time stay and volunteer.
Actually, the real lesson here is Betty takes the kids down.
Get yourself out of the equation.
Heck yeah.
So we see these. We see Jesus. I'm not going to go into all of them. Some of them are a bit of a stretch. It doesn't work perfectly throughout, but in almost every case, Jesus gives a what we've come to call a transformative initiative. It's an obedience that is meant for your transformation. Why do we obey? Probably the first reason that we obey is because we've been rescued. We tend to become like those that we love, or we tend to become like that which we love. To become like means to begin to behave and act in alignment with the things that we love. Like I told you about the example of soccer and Shay. We tend to become like the things we love. So maybe the biggest reason that we obey is because we love God and we are indebted, humbled, saved, rescued, and out of that, grace and mercy in context of promises, I would say that then those obediences and some of the motivation to obey is that we understand now that our obedience, we don't rely on it for our security. We don't rely on it for our reconciliation. We don't rely on our obedience for anything in that space, but we obey out of a response, but also because we understand that it is part of the way Jesus set up his kingdom in order to transform us. Our obediences in alignment with God, in the spirit of the Beatitudes, we anticipate this divine intervention, this divine transaction to take place in the midst of our obedience, which changes our heart. Without that obedience, we are stuck in this mosaic space of I'm not murdering and I'm working as hard as I can to keep my anger down. And when it comes to sin, it's like holding a beach ball underwater. It's just a matter of time. You look like you don't have a beach ball flying out of the water, but it's down there and it's dying to get out, and people can pick that up. And when you're doing that, your heart's getting harder and harder. There's this vicious cycle of anger. The beach ball comes up, we stick it back underwater, whatever the sin is in our life, and until we start practicing the things that Jesus asks us to practice, until we start following him, to those that are impoverished and interacting with them and getting involved with them and lifting those that are poor up and practicing personal behaviors, all these things that Jesus leads us into, when we follow him, when we obey him that way, they're transformative. They change us. Missions trips change people. They change people. Whatever your missions trip is. It can be across the sea, or it can be across the street. When we move in the kingdom, there's an eternal transaction, and there's a transformation that goes on and breaks those vicious sin cycles, and it deepens our heart, and we become like him. I think that's where I'm going to leave that today. This is, I could have used that. I could have put that transformation triangle and circle thing up there. Do you think I should do that? It would.
It's a great vision.
Huh?
It's a great vision.
Okay, let's do it. Yeah, I could just show you. You could probably see my screen here, can't you?
No.
Well, the Apple TV is no longer hooked up.
It takes a long time.
Gary
It's a long time for me to do it.
Gary might need a hand.
I already know my role in the kingdom.
Don't screw it.
I gave you height for a reason.
So I'll show you this.
Very petty man.
I'll show you this little diagram, and then we'll be done.
Hey, while we're waiting,
Yeah.
I want to throw one other thing in, because this is something that he just keeps bringing to me over and over again. This power of love is being used. You just said that when we do this, it transforms us. I think when we do that, it also transforms our world. Because if we're showing love, because all those Beatitudes, those middle ones are all about, hey, I'm telling you to love the world, this is what love looks like, people.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're doing that, we transform at least the people around us by just showing them, this is what God looks like, this is what Jesus looks like.
Yeah, I don't know how much we change the world, because the world is actually only changed when the heart changes. But we are bringing the Spirit of God into that moment and changing it. And He's coming into that space where He wasn't before.
Right.
And there's some change. It's semantics.
Well,
but
yeah,
yes.
well, I would say that salt and light part, that's what that's talking
Yeah,
about.
yes.
And I'm bringing that to the world through, He's bringing it to the world through me by actions and things that I'm doing.
Yeah, I would say, again, I don't know, it shouldn't be semantics. I think that's a better place to end, is back on light, is I think that our being transformed, our being weak, our being rescued, and when we move into the world in that space, that is an unworldly thing. To be weak, to be rescued, to be broken, to be transformed, to be humble, to be relying on Jesus. And the Spirit of God is alive in that heart and in that body and in that moment. We stay there. We move into the world. There's all that God stuff happening because I'm in the middle of this transaction.
Right, and then the insidious thing about that whole part of Scripture is the city on the hill, the light before others, again puts it into a power thing. If they see us doing these things, because that's how I grew up. It took it, you're a city on a hill, you have to be like this city on a hill, light above everybody else, so they can look up from their depravity and see this, and then know that you. And it's totally some people, they protect themselves, and we're on a city on a hill, and it totally goes against first of all, the geographical reference that is too in the Bible, but it also goes against the whole meaning of that, everything in the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
But that's, if you look up Sermon on the Mount or City on a Hill, and you read what people have written about that theologically, biblically, more times it's that concept instead of the I'm broken, now I'm light.
Yeah.
And the works they're seeing doesn't glorify me.
Right.
The idea is not to say, hey, I'm doing good works.
Yeah.
Look how awesome John is.
I'm a light. That's the problem, is when we actually think I'm a light.
That's
It's like, I'm not really a light.
The idea is, I'm going to show you Christ's love by these works I'm doing. Not because I'm awesome, but because He is.
Yeah, it's the vessel thing. It's like, it's like, you think about that cracked pot, broken pot thing, light shining down into it and then through. It's like, but I have to get myself in that space. I have to be a cracked pot, weak and needing help. And
I kind of am a cracked pot. So.
Yep.
And that's what it says, a city on a hill cannot be hidden. The concept is in Jerusalem anyway, but it's that it has nothing to do with us. Even if He's working in us and we don't want people to show, it's hidden. It's about what He's doing, not what we're actually even doing.
All right, so our aim as a church is transformation of heart. That's Jesus' aim, so that's our aim. Jesus is saying you need to be more righteous than the Pharisees. I can't interpret that any other way than you need to be changed. You need a new heart. I'm going to create in you a new heart. And we understand that's a spiritual work to begin with, right? It's a rescue. And then it is a life of putting ourselves in postures and places that lead to the Spirit of God transforming, changing our heart. So as a church, as leaders, this is huge. As leaders, you need to be transforming. Your heart has to be transforming. Otherwise, you're not a light. You're not salt. You're just doing a method or something. I don't know what you're doing. But if the gospel isn't continuing to penetrate your heart deeper and deeper, if you're not understanding the rescue that continues to take place in your own life, the brokenness that is you, and the power of God in it, you're not going to be able to actually lead someone to a transformation part. You will lead them to a mosaic construct of some sort. You will say, behave like I'm behaving. Do what I do. And then it'll be all about that, rather than, because there are things to do, but it's not about those things. This is where the other thing comes into play. this is a total flip of what is natural. So our strategy for transformation of heart is following Jesus. It is the things that he asks us to do, even as a church, right? He asks us to be worshipful and to be relational and missional, and every church defines that differently. The different styles of worship, there's different ways of worshiping. If you even, reduce it down to just singing and Sunday morning what you do, that's not what worship is. But if you did for the moment, there's many different ways of doing it. There's different types of relational constructs in the church, different ways to have community, different ways to build community, different ways to be together, different things that we do together. And there's different ways to be missional. There's different types of mission. Our point is, okay, we have these. Pick up, outline them. I think I might even have some on here, right? We see our service as an act of worship. We see our giving as an act of worship. We see what we do on Sunday as an act of worship. We have small groups. We have a global community of relationships with other people, and we have our kids and our students. Missionally, we are trying to start new communities and new places. We are trying to pray for 10 people that don't know Jesus, and we're listening to them and engaging with them, and we go on trips, and that's just some of them. Here's the point. The threat or the unfortunate possibility is that is the goal. That the goal for you and me and everyone else is to be serving, giving, going on trips, getting in a small group, having a list of 10. That would be the goal. And in way too many churches, that is the goal. But for us, that's just the strategy. Doing those things is the place we put ourselves so that God will change our heart. So when you're sitting with a life group leader, you're coaching them, or you're sitting with someone who's serving, or you're leading someone who's serving, or you're talking to somebody about their giving. The question is, what's it doing to your heart? How is God using this? I'm saying, I'm giving, but I'm not meeting with God. Well, that's a great question, right? It's at least they're thinking I'm giving, but I'm not sensing it. Well, then what do you do? Give more. Be more sacrificial. Serve differently. But it's like, okay, do we want to get people into these places? Yeah. We want to have on-ramps for trips and small groups and serving? Absolutely. But if that's the end point, we've missed it. Our objective as leaders is to be transformed by what we are doing and are following Jesus. We would say all of those ways are following Jesus. Jesus led us into relationship. He led us into corporate worship. He led us into serving. He showed us how to give. He showed us how to reach those that are far from him. He told us that the nations are important. We follow him into those places not to get a good grade and not to be busy doing those things, but to see him transform our heart. Because when he's transforming our heart, then we're a light to the very people that we're serving. Like you said, Anna Michelle, then that world changes. Now that Sunday morning is different. Now that small group is different. Why? He's in you. Breaking me, transformed. Sorry, I went the wrong way.
Where's the one that you have the circle?
It's coming. I went the wrong way.
Where's the circle triangle?
I went the wrong way. So how do we implement it? Like, how do we get that strategy going? Well, we really get it through a community pastor, the staff, and leaders. Transformation, a church bent on transformation of heart is dependent upon the Spirit of God in and through and the transformative life of the leadership. It's really all about the leadership. If that leadership turns into a management group or trip leaders or volunteer coordinators only, if those leaders are not being transformed and being broken and leading people not just into the strategy and into the stuff, but pressing the conversation toward transformation. What's God teaching you? How's He training you? How is He leading you? How is He growing you? How is He breaking your heart? How is He moving you? Then we're stalled as a movement that began 2,000 years ago, if not before that. So that's why we are putting so much emphasis at Vista into leadership development, into you. That's why I'm here. We're not handing this off. I can hand off a lot of stuff, but not leadership development. And it's why I have to continually be broken. It's very uncomfortable. I really don't like the path that God's chosen for me, or the path that I continue to stay on. I would really rather be Bobby. I would really rather be someone who clearly has it all together.
When you meet somebody like that.
Yeah.
I was wondering who that was.
Yeah, I'm not. It's not important for me to be that it be absolutely genuine. The illusion of having it all together is fine. I can live with that.
Just go on Facebook.
Yeah, you can find finally.
But this is our calling. This is what we feel. This is where God is leading us as a church. Is that we are broken leaders. We are not ready yet. We're still in the oven, and we're willing to expose that because we think that in the midst of that, God is glorified, that He is great, that He is found, that He changes. But boy, it's uncomfortable. I really do not like it. It is a constant battle for me to stay publicly not done. Because the lie is, well, people are not going to follow that forever. You know, the church is going to go away eventually. Eventually, you got to make it. Eventually, you got to arrive and write a book and have a model that everybody wants to come and see, and that you can talk about.
So when you put that in the practical, if you're not growing, if your heart's not being transformed, get out of the life group. It's not worth it. Because that's the goal. If you're connecting and you're not thinking about your heart and the people that you're just connecting, that's not it.
Get out or change it.
And the kids community, the whole goal is our heart to be transformed. Those are just means to get to the transformed heart. What we do at this.
Someone says, "Yeah, kids ministry. It's not really my thing. I don't do well at that." Well, that's the perfect place for you then.
Exactly.
That's the perfect place for you then. Get in there and feel awkward and like you don't know what you're doing. Yeah, we want to gravitate to the places where I'm good and confident and strong, and I can feel good about myself after I did it. That's where we want to go.
Because that's what it's about.
That's what it's about, man.
Me being more powerful.
Yeah, I can't survive tomorrow if I don't feel powerful today.
God's kingdom can't be built unless I feel good about it.
Yeah,
That's true. We fall to that all the time.
Yeah. I can't feel good about me.
That can't happen unless God does this to me, and then that can happen. As if we're some kind of conduit or something.
I'm telling you, people, I am sick to death of myself lately. I can't just, I think, oh God, I don't want to continue to be. I'm coming to grips with the fact that I'm going to be the other way, a bit of a mess, if not a lot of a mess, till I die. I think I was still living under the delusion that at some point this was going to take on greater shape. You know? I think it's also called a midlife crisis, but that's an entirely different issue.